Welcome to the April 20th meeting of the Penfield Board of Education. This meeting is called to order at 6:30. Please rise and the clerk will lead us in the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It is recommended that the board approve the April 20th, 2021 agenda as submitted. May I have a motion and a second that the agenda of April 20th, 2021 be approved as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. And it's recommended the board approve the following consent agenda. The approval of the minutes of March 23rd, 2021 and April 13th, 2021 as submitted. The acceptance of the recommendation from the Committee on Special Education. The acceptance of the recommendations from the Committee on Preschool Special Education. The acceptance of the recommendations from the Superintendent on personnel changes. The request to approve the recommended bidder, Kaplan Schmidt Electric, per Penfield RFB 2081-06 for district office generator dated April 6, 2021. The request to approve the recommended bidders, BSN Sports, Classic Sports Sales, and Rochester Ice for uniforms, cloth, and equipment dated April 6, 2021. The request to approve the recommended bidders, W.B. Mason Economy Paper and Buffalo Envelope as part of the Monroe 2 BOCES cooperative bid. The request to approve the recommended bidders, to do that twice, W.B. Mason Quill Court, Pyramid School, Specialty Supply, National Art School Supply, Cascade School Supplies, Standard Stationery Supplies, and ADCO brand per the Monroe BOCES cooperative bid for office and classroom supplies, and the approval for the request to dispose of unserviceable textbooks. So may I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Recommended that the board approve the treasurer's report, including the cash report, the general fund cash report, the general fund revenue status report, the general fund budget status report, the school lunch fund cash report, and the school lunch fund revenue and expense budget report for the month ending February 28th, 2021 as be approved. We have a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Which brings us to special reports. Dr. Putnam?
Yeah, thank you. So we have three special reports this evening. The first is from the Penfield High School Environmental Club, and they're here with their advisor, Mr. Wallen, social studies teacher extraordinaire from the high school. And followed by that will be two presentations from Scott Dreschler, our Director of Special Education in PPS, and those are around our special education two-year plan update and our comprehensive guidance plan. And so we'll have our students now come up. You can sit right up here at this table. There's a microphone there, so you'll have to direct the microphone at whoever's talking so we can hear you. And your slides are all loaded up, and the clicker right there should work for you. And I just want to say on behalf of the district, thank you very much. The world of COVID and our meetings, we haven't had as many student presenters, And this group of environmental club I've been meeting with over the last couple of years around lots of ideas. And so this is not a last-minute presentation, but truly years in the making from this group of students who speak for, I would say, speak for many at the high school. And I'm looking forward to the presentation and your ask of the board. So I'll turn it over to you if you guys don't mind just introducing yourself and what grade you're in, and then the show is yours.
Okay, so we'll just start off with introductions. My name is Anna Sarasoletti, and I'm a junior at the high school.
And I'm B. Reichman, and I'm a sophomore.
And I'm Anna Yato, and I'm also a sophomore.
Is the presentation?
Oh,
there we go.
Thank you to the school board for giving us the floor tonight. For the next few minutes, we want to discuss why we, the Penfield High School Environmental Club, believe it is crucial that we create a sustainability committee for the Penfield Central School District.
So before we start our presentation, we want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Putnam, Mr. McNiff, Dr. Driffill, and the school board for implementing meaningful changes in the district already. We know that your amazing efforts will not go unnoticed, and your innovation makes a meaningful impact. The use of sphagnum moss and HVAC hydronic lines, as well as the use of robotic autonomous mowers to mow school grounds, are both creative and effective ideas that have made the Penfield Central School District a more environmentally friendly school district. We really appreciate all of the time and energy that went into implementing these initiatives, and we hope that we can build off those amazing successes as momentum for more sustainable projects in the future.
We are the Penfield High School Environmental Club, a group of students at PHS working to improve environmental education and increase Penfield's sustainability. We have been communicating with Dr. Putnam and other administrators for over a year now as we developed our idea to make Penfield a more environmentally friendly and efficient district. We are here tonight because we believe that Penfield has the potential to drastically improve the quality of life for students and staff by creating a sustainability committee.
Now, we would like you, the school board, to reflect on why you're here tonight. Maybe you're here to advocate for students and staff. Maybe you're a parent looking to make sure your children have the best possible education in Penfield schools. Maybe you're a former teacher or a former student. Regardless, everyone has someone motivating them to be here tonight in the PHS auditorium. Well, we have one too. We believe that the Penfield Central School District has the capabilities to make a tremendous impact in the fight against climate change. As students, we are constantly worried about how the impending climate crisis could affect our futures. We spend over a decade learning and growing in the Penfield Central School District, preparing us for the future, but when it comes to rising sea levels, increasing CO2 emissions, and air pollution, this future is becoming increasingly uncertain. This is where Penfield can help. With a huge district like ours, we have the potential to make a massive difference in this fight. And it all starts with you, the school board. We believe that Penfield can tackle this crisis head-on by creating a sustainability committee.
The creation of a sustainability committee would be the first step in demonstrating to students and staff that the district cares about this incredibly pressing issue. The idea of a sustainability committee is simple: a group of board members, community experts, parents, teachers, and students that are passionate about protecting students and staff from the impending climate crisis. Their first project for this committee would be to create, gain approval for, and implement a sustainability plan. This committee would come at no cost to the district.
The Sustainability Committee needs to work hand in hand with the school board in the district. Instead of working against district priorities, the committee should be aimed at working for the district to improve student and staff health and well-being. Sustainability will be a common goal for all in the Penfield Central School District, and the committee will be aimed at setting goals and holding the district accountable, not forcing the district to do something against its wills.
Is that? Yeah, that's you. I already said. Oh, okay, sorry. Hang on. There we go. This is fine. A sustainability plan will outline goals and guidelines to make Penfield more sustainable and more efficient. It will set long-term goals as Penfield transitions to become more environmentally friendly and increase practices that are both cost-effective and safer for students and staff. Now, what are some ideas for the plan, you might ask? Well, we're still high school students and we're not experts, but we do believe that there are 4 key areas of opportunity: sustainable infrastructure, greenhouse gas reduction, cafeteria improvements, and environmental education could all be core elements of the plan. A creation of the Sustainability Committee is crucial in developing a sustainability plan that works for our district. We care deeply, and we do have a lot of meaningful ideas that could very well be implemented, but we're still high school students. We want this plan to be used for the next few decades, which requires the input of many different types of Penfield community members to actually make a meaningful impact. We're going to need board members' extensive knowledge of the building's infrastructure. We're going to need connections with cafeteria staff. We're going to need former and current teachers' understandings of the challenges that come with environmental curriculums. And we're going to need members that truly understand the financials in greenhouse gas reduction.
So on the slide there, you can see a rough timeline of the steps to creating this sustainability committee and the sustainability plan. So this timeline will be adjusted in the coming months, but it can give us a good idea of what our next steps will look like. Ideally, after hearing what we have to say tonight, a sustainability committee will be created, and following the creation of said committee, discussions can begin for creating a sustainability plan. Throughout this process, it is critical that there is constant communication between the Sustainability Committee, the school board, and the Environmental Club. Then, over time, the proposal for this plan will be approved and implemented. And of course, the plan would have its own timeline to help with the implementation of our sustainable practices. Lest you have yet to be convinced that we should create a sustainability committee, creating this committee doesn't cost anything at all. And furthermore, part of sustainability is efficiency. The plan itself will focus on saving the district money in the long run by transitioning to more sustainable practices. Without even considering the environmental benefits of this plan, the increased efficiency of the district will be extremely cost-effective. There are infinite benefits to creating this committee, but because the committee can brainstorm even more ways to save the district money and make Penfield a safer and more eco-friendly place to live.
Climate change poses a serious health risk to citizens in New York State. The Penfield Central School District has the potential to be a leader among neighboring districts in fighting this crisis. Brighton Central School District has already created a similar committee, focusing on forming a climate action plan. While one may think that one district cannot do anything to prevent this crisis, we beg to differ. Small changes at the district level will be monumental. Not only do they set a precedent to neighboring districts and organizations, but they will significantly reduce carbon emissions, making Penfield a safer community for all. Changes in the cafeteria will also inspire children to adopt more climate-conscious eating habits as adults. And more sustainable infrastructure will save the district money and make air cleaner for all Penfield residents.
We know that the school board is swamped right now with meetings, discussions, and budget planning. But the creation of this sustainability committee cannot wait until next year. This issue needs to be handled immediately because the crisis is only going to get worse from here. And we're students. This is going to be our future. The sooner we adjust our practices to cope with this crisis, the sooner we can show students and staff that their health and well-being are the priority. You are on the school board for a reason, to advocate for the people of Penfield. Students, staff, and parents all deserve to know that their district cares about them. The Sustainability Committee has overwhelming support from the student body. We created a sustainability support document for PHS Green Week and got over 130 signatures and counting advocating for this committee. If we push this discussion to next year, it would send a message that students' futures are not important. It would send a message that Penfield cannot be a leader in New York State. And it would send a message that this crisis isn't serious. We all know that the school board cares deeply about students' well-being. We know that. So show that to Penfield. Show students that they are the priority. Show students that their futures matter. Support the creation of this sustainability committee today. Thank you.
You gotta share that next slide, it's really important.
Really important, yeah.
It's the
We
question
don't want to miss our,
slide.
we don't want to jump our cue here. Board members, any questions? Barbara?
Barb's our environmental spokesperson.
Surprise, surprise. Thank you so much for coming. Where were you guys 7 years ago? Oh, right, you were in elementary school. I actually started talking about this 7 years ago, and I am more than excited. I am more than thrilled. And whenever you need a board member, or whenever you need a community member, because I won't always be on the board, I'm here for you. So, thank you. 7 years I've been doing this. 7.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
Can I
Yes.
make a comment? I'm just very impressed with your presentation, your facts, your figures, your passion. I think it goes a long way. It's not falling on deaf ears, and I want you to know that. And we'll be working with Dr. Putnam as well for all the logistics. You have a wonderful idea, and I'm sure you've got a lot of support here.
Thank you.
Yes, and I would just like to add, it is very important, it is very timely, and you're a great advocate for your students, but also you are a member of the community. There's many people in this community that have gone to school here and lived here their whole life, so you may be the same people who live here your whole life, and you'll be benefiting in the future from what you're advocating for today. So we definitely support this, and we appreciate you coming out and speaking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So your homework is to talk to Mr. Wallen and get me back on your schedule, and we'll finalize what that looks like. We had some conversations at board agenda setting with our president and vice president around whether we actually have a health and safety committee, and this might fit very perfectly into that as sort of a connected committee to that. Because a lot of those go hand in hand when we talk about health and safety of our students and staff, and sustainability, especially your examples. And so I just wanted to say, thank you. And I've heard and seen the presentation, and you did a great job. But what I really love is you hit home around sustainability, not just being recycling. It's so much deeper than that. And you've mentioned here that you guys aren't experts, and none of us are experts in anything, including everybody up here and everybody out there, regardless of how old you are. But I think what you've done is proven that you have quite a lot of knowledge around this. I mean, you didn't mention it, but it was in the slide around like meatless Mondays, and just a simple fact of doing some vegetarian meals at the cafeteria, what that does for the carbon footprint is fascinating. And so we'll get on this year soon. I'll come back in and we'll finalize a timeline to get the committee up and running. I hope. Is that, I think I got the okay from the board, so. All right?
Thank you. That
Awesome.
would be so much.
Thank you. Great job.
Great job.
Great job.
So now we have Mr. Dreschler, who will be presenting the next two special reports, which is right around the time we do this either every other year for that 2-year plan. And I'll turn it over to him. And please, Mr. Dreschler has worked hard on these PowerPoints. And just like when I do my presentation, he will not be nearly as engaging as our students. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Dreschler.
Thank you, because I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know how you follow that. I would like to also sign up for that committee as well. Thank you very much. My name is Scott Dreschler. I'm the Director of Special Education and Pupil Personnel Services in Penfield. This is one of the maybe 2 or 3 times where I get the privilege of presenting to the board about, in my eyes, the wonderful things that we do in the area of special education. And in this sense also, about a year and a half, it was implemented last year, the prior year, the comprehensive guidance plan. So I'm going to give you an update on those 2 things tonight. So I always like to start with, it's not the mission and the vision, but the mission statement. I specifically highlighted a couple words on here: collaboratively, individual, diverse talents and abilities, and our. For me, those stick out as far as what we do in the area of special education and how it adds to everything that we do in Penfield. Specifically, collaboratively, the thank you to the partnership that we have with SEPTA. I don't think we would be where we are with our continuum without the support of the SEPTA community that we have here. Also, diverse talents. It's when you talk about a child with a disability, it's a dis in front of the ability. This is the diverse talents and abilities, or varying abilities that we have. So we're shifting the lens of what we do in special education through our continuum, and we've been doing that based on the end goal. So what we always start with is the foundational components. Thankfully, New York State has kept graduation requirements consistent going on 2 years, 2.5 years. So the last time that I presented this, the graduation expectations have only shifted minimally. So with that in mind, our focus is relatively consistent, and we've made some little tweaks because we're successful in Penfield based on our graduation rates, based on the end product, on how our students do in New York State. So I'm going to start with the graduation options as how we plan backwards, and then talk about how that Part 200, because that's what guides us in the world of special education, are those regulations. So this is a graphic. I know it's a lot on this graphic, but it sets up two basic pathways that we have. On the top, starts on the left side, those credits, those are earned in high school classrooms and sometimes at the middle school, and they are provided, they're given, locally by the principal of the building. You need 22 of those, so that's the starting point. Within those 22 credits, you also have to pass Regents exams within those 4 areas, plus an additional Regents exam in one of those 6. That's one pathway. Those pathways will bring you to one of those 3 options: a Regents diploma, Regents with advanced designation, or a local diploma. That's the pathway that we need, that we get for those 3 diploma options. The other pathway is specifically for students that the CSE determines, the Committee on Special Education determines, that are not eligible for that pathway. So they would be suggested to go into an alternate pathway. And the exit criteria, or the exit ticket for that child, is a non-diploma credential, which is a CDOS credential or a skills and achievement. And I'll go into a little bit deeper on that. So the next slide talks about specifically the local diploma. Students with disabilities, students with varying abilities, can be eligible for a local diploma because the CSE has determined that they qualify for an IEP. So with that, there's additional options for these students to be able to graduate with a local diploma. On the left side, there's low pass with appeal, compensatory. Those are all things that the high school team, the middle school team start talking about in middle school. Again, end in sight. In 9th grade, we lay this out at a CSE meeting around what is our end goal? Is it going to happen in 4 years? Sometimes it happens in 5 years. But the end goal, again, is graduation for all students, specifically students with disabilities. And we do very well in that. The way that we are able to meet our needs of our students, we do very well. The change that came 2 years ago that is consistent now is the little star at the bottom of superintendent determination. The state has tweaked that a little bit for individual students, and it's determined by that Committee on Special Education. So it's at that committee meeting each year at least, the CSE will determine if a child may be eligible for that, and then it will be initiated by the parent if that were to be an option. Individually driven, of course. The other side of this, you'll see that a 504, some students with 504s, if determined by that 504 committee, could be also eligible for the safety net or for that low pass option. Our high school counselors are very, very well versed in this, as is Emily Buss at the high school, all of our assistant principals, and Leslie Maloney. They walk our students through this, again, starting in 9th grade to figure it out. Specifically, our IEP coordinators at the high school as well do a fantastic job helping our students navigate all of these options in collaboration with all of our support at the high school. The other part, I guess, again, is the New York State Continuum of Services. Part 200 mandates specific programs within every single school district. All of these start, as far as at the bottom of that triangle, least restrictive, and as you go up, you go more restrictive. More restrictive meaning sometimes a smaller class, and sometimes an out-of-district placement. So one of the exciting things is that we've offered all of these, because you have to, with the exception of the integrated co-teach, which is on here as optional. It is optional on the continuum within New York State, and I'll get to that in a second. But of these, we've been very successful in Penfield with our special class continuum. We're able to provide a special class at every single grade level, kindergarten through 12th grade, that aligns with a Regents diploma or a local diploma and with advanced designations and things of that sort. That's the top, Regents or local. That's the top of that box there. On the bottom is that alternate pathway, the one that I referenced in that earlier slide of students that may be alternately assessed or eligible for a skills and achievement credential. That's another pathway that we have. The ratios are different. 12-1-1 for students that are aligned with Regents and local, and the 12-1-3-1 is aligned for students in that alternate pathway. That will continue for the next 2 years all the way through age 21. A little bit more information on our 12-1-1, the pathway that's aligned on the left side again with Regents and local diplomas. We started 4 or 5 years ago aligning the curriculum within that with our 9th grade algebra exam and our 11th grade English exam. Those seem to be the exams that if students can pass those, then they're more likely to be able to get Regents or a local diploma. We've taken that curriculum in there and we've essentialized it even more so than what Penfield has done, creating their own guaranteed and viable curriculum. Jim Pfeiffer would like that I had said that. So we've essentialized that from algebra all the way down to all of our special classes, being able to spend more time on components that spiral later on in later years that specifically are targeted on that algebra exam. And we've also done that in English. So in our 12-1 classrooms, it's all Regents-based, it's all New York State standards-based per grade level. It's just instructed in a smaller student-to-teacher ratio, which allows more differentiation and more specialized instruction. The other pathway that we have, there's 3 classrooms over at Harris Hill, kindergarten through 5th grade, there's 6th through 8th grade at Bay Trail, and there's a 9th through 12th grade at the high school. I put a ratio on the right side. It's for every 3 students, there's an additional support personnel in there. This pathway is specifically targeted and is built for students with some significant cognitive and learning delays. So it could be an additional speech and language pathologist pushed into the room for some of the day to support varying needs. It could be an additional occupational therapist that may fit into one of these ratios to do that. The curriculum in here, it sprinkles in components, and our primary resource, the unique curriculum, is based on state standards, but it is not a state standards Regents and track. This specifically meets students at their levels, and it incorporates numerous life skills so that lifelong learning and independent living is sometimes the result of this. So what started out is relatively clear in Penfield with our continuum, because I think we're very reflective and we change based on the needs of the students. Some of our students go between these two. They have some classes at the high school level that are within a 12-1-1 global, and then they have some classes that may be in an English 10 that's a 12-1-3-1. So we've worked with the high school team, and Dr. Maloney's been a great advocate for this type of clarity and transparency that comes with the end product of assigning credits for those 12-1-3-1 classrooms and the Regents bound. So again, when we have those CSE meetings with the end goal in sight, we're always able to say what that adventure is going to be during their schooling. So with our special classrooms, we made a shift. This is what it looks like up until the end of 2023-24. Historically, we moved one of those classrooms. We shifted some of the ratios to a consistent, I would say we were somewhat all over the place. We shifted to a 12-1-3-1 ratio specifically because within the regulations, it talks about the needs of the students. In those classrooms, you can meet the varying needs of cognitive delays. You can meet the varying needs of those academic needs. And there's a little bit of a behavioral support within that based on the child's disability. In the 12-1-1 Regents and local, we stayed with the 12-1-1 because it's the same thing. It's Regents-based, local-based, state standards-driven, and there's a component of that behavioral support within that classroom. Now, there are things we can do in Penfield, and there's things that our continuum is not set up to do. But luckily in New York State, we partner with BOCES, and some other outside district placements that are very successful for students that don't find success within our district-based programs. So this is just the location. We switched a class at Scribner over to Harris Hill, and now we have a suite of classrooms over at Harris Hill. It is a suite, but it's also sweet because they get to work together, and the collaboration and the planning time, and when you bring kindergarten through 5th grade teachers together with the related service providers, the ideas of instruction are just phenomenal. So we found a lot of success there. I took out the questions part in between. Are you okay if I go right into the comprehensive guidance plan? Fantastic. So the comprehensive guidance plan was new. As of last year, it was supposed to be the first year implemented last year. Last year, you know, in March, we kind of went full pandemic, and we weren't able to measure these goals that we set for this. So there's new parts of this comprehensive guidance plan that were started last year. These are the main components, is that K-5 instruction now includes information on college careers. We were already doing that in Penfield. We are equipped and staffed with a school counselor at the elementary level, and we were doing a majority of that. They all have access to a certified counselor. We were already doing that. The curriculum is provided by a certified counselor. They're already pushing into the classrooms. The creation of an advisory council is new. So we have met one time this year, and I'll give you a little more information on that. We bounce ideas off of them, gather feedback. That advisory council includes Board of Ed members, local partners, colleges, local Wegmans representative is on there. Dr. Toot, our district pediatrician, is on there as well. So we had that meeting here. The plan is posted on the district website. It's 367 pages, 364 if you have time. I'll let you know where it is for some reading. But the program outcomes to be reported annually to board, that's what is part of this presentation here tonight. So it's a 3-goal cyclical kind of measurement, and this is what I'm going to share with you tonight, is that we, based on last year's implementation and this year's model, the counselor's role within the classrooms, the hybrid, the advisory council, and every level of counselors that I work with throughout this year, we agreed that we wanted to continue this 3-year cycle to be started for next school year, because ultimately that 3-year, if you look at the increased attendance by 10% of students in classrooms, it's going to be practically impossible to measure given last year's attendance from March here and this year's attendance. So this year we're really just trying to, again, when students come back, all students come back as soon as we can get them in there, going over the role of that school counselor, marketing that counselor, them going out. This is what we're able to do. This is what we do. And just making sure that students and staff know what the role of a school counselor is. And within that plan, there are measurements and assessments that we use to be able to measure this goal. After year 1, we will create a new goal for year 3. So it's kind of next year we'll create another one. But in 2 years, they'll be more present in classrooms. Great in Penfield, in the high school setting, they are doing seminars daily and weekly for students, proactively getting in front. Bay Trail, they're pushing into classrooms. So we're doing a lot of these things, but it's just to increase it. It's that good to great conversation of what we can do to continue to meet the varying needs of our students. And then again, that 3rd year is that increased attendance. We chose that goal because oftentimes the students would leave the classroom to go see a counselor. If we can proactively push in to equip the teachers and the students with the skills necessary to be able to possibly stay in the classroom, then we can increase that attendance in classrooms. And this is just the appreciation of, there's nothing that I would be able to share here because this is like my bragging right. This is whenever I've been claimed to sometimes get on my soapbox. This is the best soapbox to be on because I wouldn't be able to share all of the positive things that are happening in the world of special education, in our mental health team, our counselors, our psychs, our social workers, our staff, without them. I mean, it's absolutely them that are doing all of the work. So, I mean, all of the credit goes to them. The SEPTA, we have a model SEPTA. We've had a couple districts that have approached me. 2 of them have come to our SEPTA meetings. So I just want to continue to give them credit. And you guys, thanks for all of your support that you do to support all of our students with varying abilities and all of our students with their needs. And then again, like, it's not just the staff that are in the classrooms, it's the custodians, it's everybody that made our students where they are, but specifically this year is a testament, and last year is our special education staff was so flexible because there was not really an ability for us to pause special education. There wasn't an ability for us to pause CSE meetings. They took maybe 3 days to pick up everything they needed to do, and then they started delivering instruction as per the IEP. So all the credit goes out to all of the staff and everything that they were able to do, but it's really nice to be able to share these things with you guys because I think it's very much celebratory. So are there any questions?
Thank you. Board members? Barbara?
Well, this is my heart. This is my career as a speech language pathologist, was with the students of these abilities. And I was at the beginning, I was actually young back then, of Public Law 94-142. Because prior to that, I just a little tidbit, these children were not allowed in public school. There was no room for them. Now, 45 years later, they are here. And it was baby steps, because initially there still wasn't room in our public schools for them. And so there were outside agencies that did start up and do these things. But what was always great about Penfield was, even back then, okay, how do we get there? How do we bring them back home? Because what you said in the beginning, our students. And I am just beyond thrilled to not only have the sustainability group, but now my special ed heart is just bursting, because I was there at the beginning. And I actually was a speech therapist down in Allegheny County in a preschool program that had 4 8-year-olds because they had never been able to go to school. So I'm just telling you that what is happening here, and it's 45 years later, but this is huge. You're talking about college. You're talking about these children with their abilities that was not talked about prior to 1976. So thank you. And please tell your staff, I mean, they're just amazing. Their parents are amazing. This Penfield schools should be the Penfield community should be very proud of what's going on. So
Thanks. There was one thing I just have to add, and Barb brought up a great point. One of the things that we're celebrating most is inclusion. So our continuum 6 years ago was very special class oriented. I need to mention the shifts that we've made over the last 3 years. So specifically at Bay Trail, we have shifted some students that were in special classes have been integrated into a direct and indirect consultant teacher, where that's where the special ed teacher pushes in and they consult directly with the special ed classrooms, and then they consult behind the scenes with the general education teacher. That has been built from 7th grade to 8th grade. So working with the high school next year, we are able to implement, through the support of the high school team and their buy-in, is an integrated co-teach model at 9th grade. So that'll be a model in algebra and English. So the students that transition from Bay Trail with that direct, indirect consultant teacher that are in the gen ed classroom are going to be able to go into a model seamlessly. Historically, sometimes they go from less restrictive to more restrictive at the high school, but again, because of the reflective nature of that team up at the high school, it's integrated co-taught. And that has been a term we haven't been able to use. It's been optional. But next year is the first year at the high school, and they are on board. Emily Bust, that team with Leslie, Dr. Maloney, and the staff there. There's professional development already planned over the next 3 months and into the summer on how we're going to be able to make that work. And it'll be a grow-out model over the next 3 years. So those 9th graders will go into 10th grade, integrated co-taught, and into 11th grade, integrated co-taught. So I apologize, I did not mention that. I wanted to circle back, and I'm glad that Barb, you mentioned something that helped trigger something in my head, so I appreciate that. That's a huge celebration for our students in that varying abilities and that inclusion mentality of all students belong to all of us.
Any other board members? No, it's, I think it's tough to add anything to what Barb has said. I think she's expressed it very well. So again, thank you. Thank you very much, Scott, for all that you've done and keeping us up to date.
Thank you, guys.
I think you held your own against the students, too. You did a nice job bringing all that together in
Although,
one piece.
if I may say, their slides were just a
yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
better looking. That's all.
I agree. I'll consult
on
with
that.
them to create mine next year.
That is true. Scott, thank you very much, and that, for the board, that concludes special reports for this evening.
Yeah, nobody's clapping for Scott.
No, I got a couple questions.
Next up is the student representative report. Abby, would you please present your report?
Hello, everybody. It is that time again. Okay, to start things off, at Penfield High School, the girls lacrosse team began their season. I have practice tonight, actually, and I am so excited to have a season, so fingers crossed it's successful. April 13th was the first day of unified bowling practice. The girls' volleyball team celebrated their senior night on April 15th. Good luck to them as they finish off their season. And Penfield seniors were able to paint a parking spot, and I was very surprised at how hard it was to paint the ground for 4 hours. At Bay Trail, a group of students came together to create a beautiful art piece that was displayed in a hallway for Jackie Robinson Day on April 15th. At Indian Landing, second graders read and learned about Hershey's chocolate, and they were even able to taste a bit of it. And I'm jealous about this because right now I'm learning about trigonomic identities and would much rather be tasting chocolate, but it's okay. In some classes, also at Indian Landing, students went on an egg hunt for comprehension questions, which they then answered and shared their thinking process with the class. In Scribner, one class, students went outside to observe our ecosystem. At Harris Hill, various grade levels participated in social emotional learning lessons. I saw 2 examples in grades 1 and 5. Kindergartners took a mindfulness break to practice relaxation and being in the moment. And the 3rd grade team put together a glow day to talk with students about having fun with assessments, because I think that's very important, since I feel like for a lot of people and students, assessments can be a huge source of anxiety. So to see that they were having fun and that the whole room was lit up with these glow sticks, it was awesome to see. Lastly, for district-wide news, March 26th was Social Emotional Learning Day. The Penfield School District was named one of the best communities for music education in the nation, and I think that is a wonderful achievement, and I'm proud to be a part of the Penfield District. And lastly, elementary students began going to school 5 days a week, and it's very surprising how quiet my house is without my brother there. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, any questions for Abby? Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby.
Did you say you have practice tonight?
I do.
Do you need to leave?
Yes, at 8.
Okay, I just making sure. All right, so thank you, and because my presentation will be later, but you again always steal the thunder and celebrate everything in Penfield that the students are doing, our schools are doing. So thank you so much, and good luck at practice tonight.
Thank you so much.
Next is public comment. This is the designated time for district residents to bring their comments to the board. The board encourages residents to share their options. To share their opinions, voice concerns, and offer suggestions in a constructive atmosphere. Matters involving particular individuals or specific negotiations are not permitted during public session and should be addressed privately with the board president or superintendent. Comments brought to the board will be taken under consideration. However, this is not a time when the board can answer questions or engage in dialogue. A request to speak form must be filled out prior to the start of the meeting and given to the district clerk. Speakers are expected to identify themselves with their name and address before presenting and limit their comments to 5 minutes or less. The board president reserves the right to limit the total amount of visitor speaking time based on the length of the agenda. Written communications are also always encouraged. It looks like we have a number here. So the first one would be Heather Roth. Oh, please state your name and address.
Sure, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name's Heather Roth, and I live at 87 Aspen Drive.
I am the mother of two beautiful children, a daughter in 5th grade and a son in 8th grade. It's their last year at their respective schools, so it's a big year in our household. They have been virtual since March of 2020. Why did I choose virtual? I was a nervous mom. Back in September, I felt like I didn't have enough information and understanding to send them to school. And I had the luxury of working from home, which I know a lot of parents did not have that. So a lot of kids have been home alone since March of 2020, trying to navigate school and life without a parent. I would like to commend my children's teachers. They've done a fabulous job. We have Miss McManus for 5th grade, who's been fabulous. And my son's 8th grade team is just wonderful. Mr. Mason, Mr. Giannetti, Mr. Grover, they're all amazing. Although my children are virtual, I see the strong need for schools to reopen while preserving a virtual option for those who need or want it. My son misses his peers and his school so much. He absolutely loves Bay Trail, and this would have been his last year there. He was so excited that school was going to open this week. We even went back to school shopping because he's been virtual. Only to hear that 4 days before the exciting first day of school, it was off again. It was heartbreaking in my house. Excuse me, he's upset. We reached out to the school to see what a hybrid schedule would look like. Ms. Stutz was very accommodating, but virtually all of his teachers were going to change. My son had to decide between seeing friends and setting foot in his school or keeping his teachers. Not a decision I'd like to see my 14-year-old have to make. I am concerned as I see other schools open, such as in Mamaroneck County and Onondaga County. How can they open and we cannot? What are we doing to ensure schools reopen? It just feels like we're waiting around on a weekly basis for guidelines while other schools are getting the kids back into the classrooms where they need to be. I feel like our school has moved furniture back, but beyond that, I as a parent haven't heard of the solid steps we are taking. I am concerned not only about this year, but the fall. I truly hope the reopening committees, which I think are a great idea, work hard to come up with solutions that should have, in my opinion, been implemented this year. 14 months of no full-time school is unimaginable. I have come to these board meetings to hear my fellow parents and also hear how Dr. Putnam and all of you on the board feel about things and what you're doing. It is clear my fellow parents and I are concerned. We attend these meetings, we open up our hearts, we air our concerns because we love our children. When I heard that our Penfield children are not getting out of bed, they're not eating, they're even cutting themselves, I was depressed and saddened. I was sure that after all of these student stories, the board would engage with us as parents. That didn't seem to happen. There is never any dialogue or conversation in these meetings. 14 months of no constructive work as a group together. It almost feels like we are pleading to a judge and a jury at times. We lay out our concerns to a panel of board members. And I honestly don't know how any of you feel or where you stand on reopening. And after 14 months, I feel like I should have an idea, as a resident of Penfield. This is not saying you're not doing your job. I don't know where each of you stand as an individual. My recommendation is town hall style meetings where we actually engage in meaningful conversations. Why can't we ask questions after all of you and Dr. Putnam present? That's when we have questions. Why are we not talking more about reopening at the end of these board meetings? For instance, we hear more about someone retiring or a rooftop garden, when in my mind there is nothing more important than opening these doors for our children. We would love to hear your thoughts and plans and work together as a cohesive group. Maybe at the end of this meeting, you will share with us your viewpoints and where you stand. I know that none of us has lived through a pandemic, and I know there's no playbook for this, but I feel like we have to work better, a little bit more productively, and just have a little more transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roth. Next up is Rich Tyson. Mr. Tyson, please state your name and address.
Yeah, Rich Tyson, 21 Knolltop Drive. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear us this evening, and I wish I didn't have to follow her. She did a great job. So to the distinguished members of the school board, Dr. Putnam, I'll try to keep these comments brief. You know I'm not always good at that, but I'll do my best this evening. So I'm bringing a message of encouragement for a restoration of sanity here in Penfield. I'm going to bring it to you from a real estate perspective. So I am a real estate broker. I've been investing in inner city properties for about 5 years. And in 2019, the New York State Legislature enacted the Tenant Protection Act, which totally changed the relationship between housing providers and tenants, and not for the better. And I've spent the last year and a half, as Dr. Putnam knows, I've explained this to him before, advocating for a restoration of sanity into that relationship, because what's taking place is a decimation and a destroying of affordable housing and of affordable housing providers, especially those in concentrations of poverty, which I've chosen to invest into. And one thing I've learned in that process is both at the county level and the state level that there is not an appetite for restoration of sanity. I cannot get legislators to take a look at the issue from a different perspective. They look at it from a position of wanting to hold those positions of power that they have and to hold on to them long enough that they can cash in on that New York State retirement. Outside of that, they don't really have an appetite for viewing this problem holistically. So I'm here to tell you that if you're waiting for the New York State Legislature, or even the county legislature for that matter, to come to you with a plan for sanity restoration, it's not going to happen. I can guarantee you that. Don't hold your breath. You won't be doing well. The other thing I'd like to bring to your perspective is, I'm a young agent, I guess, younger agent. Majority of my clients are first-time buyers. Outside of numbers of bedrooms and bathrooms, one of the top things that people give me in criteria for searching for a home is school district, because our homes are tied to our school districts. There's not a separation of that. So one of the things that I've seen in showing people houses is they're often shocked at how much school taxes are, whether they're going to have a child in that district or not. And one of the things that I've seen take place over this last year is a lot of people, even just on my little street on Knolltop Drive across from Indian Landing, asking what are they getting for that money that they're forced to spend on this school district. And what I'm seeing is people taking their kids out and going to private schools, homeschooling, trying to find a different way to do it, because they're not feeling that they're getting the value for the dollar, and that dollar's not portable. That dollar's tied to their house, that house is tied to a school district. And I'm hearing more conversation of people saying that they maybe like those dollars to be tied to those students and not to their property. And what does that do? That threatens property values, because if people start realizing that they don't have to live someplace, or they don't want to necessarily live in a particular district because the product of education that works better for their family and for their students is elsewhere, we're going to see a drop in property values potentially in Penfield if people don't feel that they need to be here for what has been a quality education that children have been receiving. What happens if we have declining property values? I know that's kind of a crazy thing to think of in this market that we're in, but what do we see with declining property values? We see declining assessments. With declining assessments, we see declining revenues that come back into the school district to provide the things that we want to provide for these students. So I'll leave you with this. I think you guys and girls are in the seats of power right now. I think you have the ability to push back and advocate for a restoration of sanity. Get these kids back in the classrooms, get them in their learning, get them on the school bus. I'll leave you with this last little thing too, is this morning walking my daughter across the street, and I thank God that I walk her to school, because the line of traffic trying to get down North Landing Road and into Indian Landing this morning looked like a motorcade for the president coming to town. And you can see the frustration from people trying to get out of their own driveways and get to work. These kids are sitting next to each other in class. There's no reason they can't be on the bus. Get them back on the buses, get them back in the classroom, and don't wait for anybody from any form of government to come in and tell you it's time to go, because they're not going to do it. I can tell you that from the real estate perspective, and I hope that you take the positions that you have and use them wisely. And I thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson. Next up is Jessica O'Connor. Ms. O'Connor, please state your name and address.
Hello again, I'm Jessica O'Connor, 33 Hollybrook Drive. You're probably tired of hearing from me, but I did, it's just sort of in my nature to, fight when I see things that are not as they should be. As we all know, our secondary students are not back. That's confusing to a lot of people because 6 weeks ago we sat here and watched the presentation that you guys confidently presented of the plan to get the kids back. And then we kind of moved forward with that until that guidance came out and, it all kind of fell apart. You had the intention. We know you wanted to bring the kids back, but there wasn't the conviction behind it. I don't think that would have, put us in that place if we could have been. Parents were disappointed, teachers were disappointed, but most importantly, the students were disappointed. Their teachers told them they were going back, their families told them they were going back, and in a year of 14 months of disappointments for these kids, this was the last thing that they needed, which and I know you agree too, because you're stating that. You agree that these guidelines are over the top. They're unreasonable. They're tied, I was on the news last week talking about, they're tied to community rates of infection, and that's ludicrous to tie that to a group of healthy, physically healthy young adults that have proven that they are safe in school. But as hard as you guys fought back before to the state and advocated to the state, that's what I wish you guys were doing right now. Banding together, even if Penfield or all of Monroe County or all the state just coming together and saying, no, it's not fair. It's not fair to put this on our kids. It's making it harder to get these kids back. And there's a real possibility that tying this to infection rates is going to prevent them from being back in the fall. Because, if we can't make the cohorting work, we can't make the 6 feet work in the secondary, what do we do? What do we do if our infections just don't get under control? It's a really real possibility, so there's got to be a different answer. You guys have evidence that you can go back to the state with and say, look, we've been doing this. And by the way, our kids are suffering. We sat here 6 weeks ago and showed you so many stories of kids suffering, and when we sent you that document, which was all the stories, about 100 stories from families. No, it's not hard data, but it's something to go off of and say, look, we're facing a crisis here in our town. San Francisco did that out in California, right? They were having such a crisis. I think it was San Francisco. They just decided they were bringing all their kids back despite, the guidelines. With that, though, as Heather was saying, people came here, they shared those stories. Students have shared their stories. You respond to the students here about how much you care about all students, and you do, of course you do, but that's not what the parents that are here are hearing from you. I guess I would have expected the superintendent's report or something to, instead of just talking about diversity initiatives and maybe talking about what we're doing to address this mental health thing that's going on with our kids. Are we surveying families for real to find out what's going on? What kind of interventions are we taking? If we can't get these kids in the classroom, which is the answer, to help pull them out of this, what are we doing for them? So that is something I think everybody out here would like to see. And I think that's all. Just none of this stuff. And of course, this stuff matters. Sustainability matters, and special education and inclusion. You can't be included when all your friends aren't in the classroom, and you can't save class. None of it matters if the kids aren't in school. So this should be the focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Next up is Nicole Brudalis. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Nicole Berdulis, 134 Milford Crossing. I just wanted to kind of come here tonight. I've taken a break a little bit for my own mental sanity, but my children are in elementary school. I have one now and one coming in the district next this coming September. I've sat at some of these board meetings. I've watched them when I haven't been here. I've spoken at a couple of them, and My children, as I've stated, are elementary students, and my daughter went back to school, everything's great, but I am pretty passionate that 6th through 12th should be back also. And I kind of wanted to just, we've talked about barriers, and I know that, nobody likes to hear about them. We don't want to use them in Penfield for whatever reason. I think that we weren't expecting for the state to come back with saying that they were not allowed anymore. And I think that if we would have been more proactive as a district and as a community, perhaps, maybe our K through 12 students would all actually be back right now. I have friends that their elementary school students went back to school, and then they might have a 6th or an 8th grader also that's not back in school, and their homes are tough. And I know, Dr. Putnam, you've shared that your students, I believe your own children are in middle school, so I'm sure that you're probably not happy, with the decision and with the state either. But I do think that the first speaker that kind of mentioned, maybe like a forum where there's some questioning and answers, you could probably comment on that, as to why we didn't use the barriers. I personally don't know why we don't, and I think that maybe that would have been helpful to know why you didn't, not you specifically, but why Penfield didn't want to use them. So with that said, what are we going to do to get all of our students back in September? That's kind of like where we need to focus, like other people have said also. I'd like to end, my speaking right now. I'm not going to call out any names because I don't think the rules allow that, but my daughter's elementary school teacher has been phenomenal. She goes to Scribner. My daughter has a little bit of, when her routine changes, she gets a little bit anxious, and the way that the teacher, I'm not sure if all the teachers, the kindergarten teachers did it, but she had the children write like a little letter to each other to get to know, the different cohorts, and it was amazing. And I just kind of wanted to, do that sandwich effect. I've obviously spoke about wanting everybody to come back, but, I cannot thank the, my daughter's teacher enough. She has been wonderful. As a parent having a child enter kindergarten during a pandemic, it was obviously extremely stressful for me a little bit and my husband, but this teacher is just amazing. I don't have, if I could give her like a big gift card somewhere, I would. She's truly amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Badilis. Next up is Diane Groom. Ms. Groom, please state your name and address.
Diane Groom, 12 Penbrook Drive, Penfield. Good evening. I believe that you are all aware that other school districts in red zones in New York have fully reopened full-time in person right now. However, this school district continues to use the red zone excuse to justify not reopening 6 through 12, as discussed in the most recent district email to the community. I reviewed the New York State and CDC guidelines, and there is no guideline stating that schools in red zones cannot fully reopen. New York State guidelines clearly state that in middle and high schools, 3 feet between students in classrooms is recommended only when schools can use cohorting. This is a direct quote from the New York State guidelines under physical distancing, which allows schools to fully reopen even if they are in the red zone. I moved here from Long Island last summer. I lived in the Comstock School District in Suffolk County, New York. Had I stayed on Long Island, my teenage son would be going to school full-time in person right now. Suffolk County, like Monroe County, is currently in a red zone, but they found a way to bring back their students full-time in person right now in compliance with the New York State guidelines. All students in K through 12 in Comstock School District, which is a red zone, are offered 100% full-time in-person instruction right now. Our voices have not been heard by this board. We have repeatedly told you stories about how teenagers who now have to take medication for mental health issues, have experienced suicidal thoughts, and/or have engaged in physical self-harm, isolation, and withdrawal. We trusted you with our kids. You've ignored our pleas, and you have failed them. In closing, I sincerely hope that when you give your presentation tonight, you will be telling all of us parents about the efforts that you have made to bring back our students full-time, in person, right now, without any more excuses. I sincerely hope that you will announce tonight that our beloved and cherished children and teenagers will be returning to school full-time, in person, right now, just like all the other school districts in New York in the red zones have been doing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Groom. And next up is Linda Schreiber.
Good evening. My name is Linda Shriver, and I live at 1420 Jackson Road. I'm here today to share some concerns about the plans to purchase the land on Jackson Road and relocate the transportation and buildings and grounds operations to that property. I understand and support the need to reduce traffic congestion around the current bus garage location on 5 Mile Line Road. I also understand that the needs of the district have outgrown the space available at that location, so there's a need to expand the transportation facility. However, I am concerned about the cost, choice of location, and local resident safety with the current proposal. Regarding cost, I understand there's a purchase of 40.1 acres for a cost of $802,000, which amounts to about $20,000 an acre. Other parcels of land in this area of Penfield have recently sold for much less. 33.3 acres sold for $390,000, which is about $11,712 per acre. And also nearby, 57.2 acres sold for $375,000, which is about $6,556 per acre. How can the school district justify paying such a premium price for the land on Jackson Road? As a taxpayer in the district, I'm highly disappointed because it doesn't appear that the district is pursuing a cost-effective path to implement this project. Regarding the location, personally, I object to locating the new transportation center in an R1 residential area. I know that the school district is not bound by local zoning ordinances, but it would seem much more suitable to locate this facility on available property in the Route 250 Atlantic Road area that's already zoned for mixed use. I also understand that much of that Route 250 corridor is really in the Webster School District, but I wonder if anyone has ever pursued a school district boundary alteration with the Commission of Education. Not only is that area more suitable for the proposed project, but it's also more centrally located in the district and would likely result in reduced transportation costs compared to the proposed location. The Jackson Road property is located at the northernmost tip of the school district. It would appear that if the entire fleet of vehicles is located at this facility as proposed, there will be an increase in transportation costs due to increased travel distances. I've asked to see the cost efficiency comparison of the current site and proposed site, but was told that no such study exists. It seems like we need to take those costs into consideration. I wonder, has the district considered a split location instead of relocating the entire operation to Jackson Road? For example, would it be more cost-effective to keep buses for Cobbles, Indian Landing, and out-of-district runs, along with maintenance vehicles, at the current 5 Mile Line location, since they would be closer to the schools that they serve? Then perhaps a less expensive satellite location could be established elsewhere in the district to serve the other schools. Regarding safety, I have read the traffic impact study on the district's website, and if I understand correctly, there could be an increase of 200 to 250 vehicle trips on Jackson Road, with similar numbers heading east and west on Plank Road. Jackson Road is considered a major collector county road. The shoulders on the road are narrow, and there are no sidewalks on the side of the road. Jackson Road is a popular route for walkers, joggers, and bicycle riders. Many of these people are out early in the morning or late afternoon, before and after work, which is the same time the increased bus traffic will occur. Pedestrian safety is a real concern, and I would ask that the school district take an active role with the town to recommend the installation of sidewalks. There's also a concern with speeding on Jackson Road. Frequently, I have seen drivers accelerate rapidly when leaving the intersection of Jackson and Plank, heading south on Jackson. I happened to live at the first house on the left when heading south, and our car was totaled when we were hit by another car that chose to pass while we were slowing down to turn left into our driveway. I would ask that the school district take an active role with the county to recommending additional no passing lane markings on Jackson Road to prevent these kind of problems from happening. Since the original data for the traffic study was collected in 2017, it does seem reasonable to collect some current data to validate the assumptions that were made in the 2020 update. In conclusion, I appreciate that the district has been working on these plans for a very long time, and truthfully, you are in a no-win situation because no one wants to live next to a bus garage. It feels particularly unfair that the people most directly impacted by the traffic increases caused by this proposed project live in the Webster School District and will have no voice in the upcoming budget vote. I hope the concerns I have raised will be given serious consideration and that it's not too late to consider alternatives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Shriver. And that concludes visitor speaking time. Now we're ready for superintendent's report. Dr. Putnam.
All right. So this evening we have student staff honors. I have some Penfield updates. Just so happens I'll address some of the visitor speaking points within my presentation. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Driffill for a very exciting budget development update. And this is the board meeting where the board needs to approve the budget for it to go to the voters in May. So first, very exciting is student recognition. Congratulations to our very own Penfield High School junior, Zipporah Sparkman, who was one of 13 students across Monroe County honored at the Princeton Prize in Race Relations recognition ceremony. Students were recognized for having a significant positive impact on race relations in our community. This is actually a extremely prestigious award and one that really proud to have one of our students apply and be recognized. So just congratulations to Ms. Sparkman and this prize. Nice job. As our wonderful board rep mentioned, we were named on the 2021 list of best communities for music education by the foundation, NAM Foundation, and just kudos to our music. If you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at our webpage and the social media connected to our Penfield music program, in a world of COVID, we were able to put out quite a lot of virtual presentations, virtual music, and students really came far and beyond with what they were able to do in a virtual setting. Up until the new New York State guidance, it was 12 feet of distance in music class, and so now we're at 6, but it's still pretty difficult to have a full orchestra, a full band at 12 or 6 feet. But they really have done some great things. So please make sure you take a look at our webpage and social media for some of those amazing things we've done, our students have done. So updates. It is bittersweet. So we have our 5th grade return, some great pictures Nancy Bradstreet put together for us. Lots of photos on social media, and obviously I'm sure we know I was in, I didn't get to all the buildings by tonight, but the ones I stopped into, students were very excited, teachers were very excited. We did put out through the Office of Instruction some reminders for our teachers in that really this is sort of like it is a back to school. And so I'm happy to hear some comments tonight from parents, and we have received some positive emails as well, in the sense of this was really about bringing cohort A and B together again, and taking that time not to dive into assessment or rigorous instruction, but really to take some time for that breather and get kids back to that process. And so lots of great social media pictures and tweets and positives around how our staff were able to bring kids back and make them feel safe. I walked through Cobbles on last Friday, and I would say every classroom I asked how students were feeling about coming back at kindergarten through 5th grade. And every class said the same thing. There were students who said they were scared, and there were students who said they were excited. And so in my role, I was shifted scared to nervous, and I think we talked about that really was the feeling for all kids, that there was a continuum of really excited and also some nervousness for coming back with more kids. But once we got everybody in there, we've heard nothing but positives. I'm sure with all of our kids, not everybody had the best experience, but so far, all we hear is reporting of just positivity and coming back in. There's that picture there of our music classroom down the bottom, and you can see that's 6 feet of distance. Just before this new guidance, that would have been 12 feet, so there would have been about 2 kids in that picture. So a pretty positive return for K-5. However, that leads us to this piece, which is the last board meeting when I talked, we were very excited about coming back. We had worked within the means we had. The guidance we had, as you know, was not updated since August, and that frustration level was there, and we continued to push forward. Since that board meeting, the state released updated guidance. And so it's great for some things. The mandatory face mask policy, we sort of always thought it was mandatory, but they made it really mandatory, I guess. The barriers aren't recommended, and I'll talk briefly about barriers, is that the barriers and why Penfield didn't use barriers, and most of Monroe County schools didn't, was because of the science around barriers, that they don't stop COVID. I'm not a scientist. I'm not anything more than an educational doctor. So if there was like an emergency on a plane, I can help them write curriculum. I can't do anything else. But we do trust in the science and the data around barriers, and ultimately why they were approved in the beginning, they weren't no longer approved and recommended because, and it does make sense, that COVID is transmitted through spittle, through air, and a barrier isn't going to stop that. And so that was a decision that most districts in Monroe County did make, Penfield being one of them, and following that science and data, which we said we would do. And ultimately, now barriers are not recommended. But as I mentioned earlier, the good news is for music and PE, the distancing shifts from 12 to 6 feet, which is helpful to get more kids in and do more participation. And then schools, really excited, this is what we were advocating for really strongly, was to lessen the distancing, the physical distancing from 6 feet to 3 feet. And so at first, this is great because we can get kids back at 3 feet. Actually, we can get kids back at about 4 feet, to be honest. In some classrooms, we need 3, and many others, we can do it with more than 3, but it has to be less than 6 to get all students back in. So we're ready for that. We've got our desks back in. We were very excited, as parents mentioned, as my own children were, as my wife was. And then that new guidance shifted to that CDC, so the level of community transmission. So schools can go down to 3 feet, it's pretty clear, as long as the community transmission rate is in the low, moderate, or substantial range, or you can cohort. And so at elementary, we can cohort. Kids are typically with their elementary school teacher for the whole day. And then when they go to art or music or PE, they're with their class. So that is the definition of cohorting. When we originally saw cohorting, Myself and another superintendent really looked and said, I think we can cohort our secondary schools through the means of using Infinite Campus. So even though at secondary kids go class to class to class, if we can follow them via Infinite Campus, I can figure out contact tracing. So we brought that to the Monroe County Department of Health. We brought that to our legal review, and we're told that's not cohorting. And then the New York State guidance made it pretty clear that cohorting means that you're with the same students or in the classroom together. So at a secondary level, that would mean kids teachers moving around. And I'll talk about that in a minute in the next slide. So we're talking about transmission rate. This is right from the CDC. And so New York State Department of Health says, look at the CDC for their guidance. I mean, their updated guidance is like 34 pages. It's not very long. It's pretty easy to read. It's on our webpage. I encourage people. I put out the email with the links to both the CDC and the New York State Department of Health guidance. So it is tied to transmission rate. If you can't cohort, then you have to tie yourself to the transmission rate. So how you figure out the transmission rate is, if you want to do the math, you take the number of new cases in our county over a 7-day period, add them up and divide it by 7.41 because we have 741,000 residents in Monroe County. So that's how you determine it. Or you can just go to the CDC or Monroe County webpage and they do the math for you. But I thought it was important to talk about how they figure that out because that was a big question. So Monroe County is currently at 241 cases per 100,000, and that puts us on this chart very strongly in the red high transmission zone. And so that means based on that guidance, based on the legal review of that guidance, and based on working with the Department of Health and even reaching out to the New York State Department of Health, they keep pushing us back to the guidance and saying that's what you have to follow. And so right now we're in the red zone. So this is also from the CDC, which New York State Department of Health links to. And these are the CDC prevention methods for a school system. And so you'll notice there's 4 color zones. There's blue, yellow, orange, and red. I'm sick of colors. I would just like to talk with no colors anymore, but this is CDC in New York State, so everything's tied to a color. So in the low transmission world, high schools and middle schools, I didn't put the K-5 on here because K-5 we can cohort, but focusing in on the secondary schools, middle and high schools, no issues if we were blue or yellow. We're not going to be blue or yellow for any time soon. I think that's true. But orange and red is where we live in red and we can get to orange. In the orange zone, which is that this area where we've got basically the 7-day transmission rate is between 50 and 99, or where we are is over 100. But if we get to that 50-99 range, then all of a sudden we can use 3 feet distancing, and we just have to recommend using cohorting. So we could go back to what we talked about as using our Infinite Campus scheduling system to determine who is sitting next to every single kid. We're in the red zone, so based on the CDC, schools that use cohorting can stick with 3 feet distancing. Schools that can't use cohorting, that means you have to keep that 6-foot distance between students in classrooms. So 2 things. 1, September, we are going to open 5 days a week in September. I cannot do this. I've said it openly. I can't do this as a superintendent. I can't do this as a father. I can't do this as a husband. Opening up in 5 days, we have to. So we have our reopening committees I'll talk about in a little bit. But that is without question what we will do because we have time to plan based on this guidance. To shift into a cohorting model now, if you think about our high school and the number of courses we offer and how proud this district is about the number of courses we offer, and then say we have to find a way to offer all those classes, but have students sitting in the same room and the teachers moving, but the students staying together. In one class of social studies, 11th grade, American history, those students leave that class and go to 6 different math classes. So we can't cohort the kids overnight at the high school to make them all stay in one room so we can be less than 6 feet and cohort at the high school. The middle school, we could cohort, but we need time to do it. The middle school is easier to cohort because there's less choices at middle school. You take 6th grade classes, 7th grade classes. When you get to 8th grade, you do have some acceleration. But in terms of trying to, that is recreating the schedule, everybody's getting a new teacher, everybody's getting a new schedule, and we won't be able to offer some of the classes that we have right now. So we're not saying we can't. We're still digging into the cohorting at middle school, but the amount of change that that's going to create, we don't know if we can pull it off in time. So instead, what we have to continue to do, got to stop hitting that button and hit my button here. What we got to continue to do is advocacy. And I understand, and I wrote this down. I can remember it. Restoration of sanity. I really like that statement, because that is, without a doubt, that frustration that we hear here and the frustration I receive in the community when I am out at Wegmans or anywhere else. I understand it. I don't disagree, and I can tell you that every board member here fully is frustrated too. So we're going to continue monitoring those transmission rates. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think they're going to go down. I don't think that with a 7-day average, we're going to wake up tomorrow and it's going to be 50. So therefore, we're not done. We're continuing to advocate for secondary schools to return to 5 days of in-person instruction. So how are we doing that? We're pushing hard to say, stop using the county-wide transmission data and use what we have, student and staff COVID test data. We've got about, and please don't quote me on this, but I think we have about 75% of our families opting in for the COVID testing, the rapid testing that we're continuing to do in our schools. We've got that. It shows that there is 0 or close to 0 of positivity being found in our schools. We do have, and we put everything on the COVID dashboard, so that's on our webpage. You can go to the New York State COVID dashboard and see. We are not without COVID cases. We have students out right now with COVID, we have staff out with COVID, and we have students and staff quarantined because of COVID. So it's not like it's not happening, but we feel that we can still do it safely in our buildings based on the masking and all the other protocols we have in place. So we're continuing to push for our school-based metrics to be looked at. We're also continuing to push. Now, right now, Penfield zip codes are still in the red zone, but they're not 244 or 241. They're lower than that. So we're also advocating to at least consider using school district zip codes to figure out, instead of tying us all to the full Monroe County. And then also using the staff vaccination rate. So we do have anonymous data. We don't ask individuals if they were vaccinated because there's some HIPAA privacy there. But in terms of anonymously, our vaccination rates continue to increase. More and more adults are choosing that. It's not a requirement. We can't make it a requirement, but it's a choice. And everybody right now, as you know, in our area, you can get a vaccination if you want one. For a while, it was like a Springsteen ticket, and now it's more like REO Speedwagon. So, of 2000, not when they were great. But that's the reality, is that this is the metrics that we need to be using. So, the other piece here is then around our reopening committees. And I'm going to come back to something. But our reopening committees, we did meet as a full committee just to go over the process and what it would look like. I did send out an email with a link. It's on our webpage. You can go and see who's on all of the reopening committees. And we're going to be meeting. Those committees are meeting without me. So each committee has 2 facilitators. And they are going to be meeting regularly starting in May. Within the first 2 weeks of May, each committee is meeting on their own. And our goal is going to be to use this existing guidance, the most updated guidance that we just have, to focus on September. We are hopeful that that guidance will continue to become easier to work with maybe a new updated guidance in the summer or in June. However, we've learned that if it went from August to March with updated guidance, I'm not gonna bet on the state. I'm not gonna bet on the state restoring sanity. So. We're going to use this guidance now to figure out how we can come back full-time in September, whether that be 3 feet distancing, whether that be cohorting, however it might be. At our K-5 buildings, there's 3 of them. By the time September rolls around, we will have new space. Indian Landing's cafeteria is on track, I believe, to be open early fall. We've got classrooms coming at Indian Landing. The Scribner cafeteria will be back online, 4 new classrooms there, and then 4 new classrooms at Cobble. So we'll have more space at the elementary levels if something changes with that 3-foot guidance. And then our plans, our outcome of these committees is that they will create a working plan to allow for a full K-12 return. That is their mission. That is what they're going to be working on. And then we'll be sharing those plans along the way with the community, because we obviously need a larger community buy-in for what our plans will be for September. Well, we're planning, and I want to be honest and transparent, we're planning for a 100% virtual model. So there is a 100% virtual model reopening advisory committee. We don't know if New York State will require us to have a 100% virtual model again like they did this year. If they require it, we want to make sure we've got the best system in place. If they don't require it, it's going to be a very difficult conversation because it's extremely costly to have a 100% virtual program. If it's not required, it will be a conversation with the board and around how does this work and what does it look like. So I don't know right now, nobody knows if they will require it. So when we take a look at our reopening plans and this piece, we reached out to, trying to be, transparent, we reached out to our insurance company and we reached out to our legal advisors. And so this is what's tough. So I hear that other schools are opening in the red zone. We've made some calls, and some of them are able to do it at 6 feet distancing. They're able to shift. We can't do the 6 foot distancing. Some of the schools I know of across the state were able to cohort. For whatever reason, they could figure out cohorting because they maybe offer less classes. They're able to do it. They have the space. So I don't know yet of a district, I'm still finding and looking, that said, forget New York State, we're going to open at 3 feet and go for it. There are some counties in the state that we've heard of where the county Department of Health and the county executive says, I got your back, you do what you need to do. At the end of the day, they don't have the legal ability to actually do that. So as we look at reopening and our advocacy and our push here, we're not giving up on the secondary level. One of the speakers spoke and mentioned, yeah, I do. I've got 2 kids in middle school, and no matter how much frustration I hear from everybody, I'm getting it at home 100%. And so that is really this continued push for reopening schools. But when we speak to our insurance company and the legal piece, the insurance company is the one that is big. If I could just do something and it would all ride on my shoulders and I would take the heat for it, there's little in me that would say I wouldn't do it, all right, to get my kids back in 5 days. The comparison I got from our attorney was, and it makes sense to me, if you have a swimming pool, your insurance company says you need to have a fence around your swimming pool. And if you decide you don't like the fence and you take it down, your insurance company no longer pays if, gosh forbid, something happens in that pool because you went against your insurance. We have insurance for the Penfield Central School District to protect the taxpayers. And so if there is a claim, and there are claims for lots of different reasons, our insurance company supports us, just like it does for your home insurance. So part of that is tied to following all of the New York State laws and the Department of Health guidance for whatever we need to do, New York State education. If I knowingly go against it, we put our district in a spot where any insurance claim wouldn't be paid, wouldn't be supported. And so that doesn't fall on me, that falls on the full community of the taxpayers. And so that is something that we have to carefully consider. We work closely with Monroe County schools. They're all in the same spot right now. If they can't find a way to open at 6 feet at secondary, our Monroe County schools around us are in the same spot we are. We are meeting regularly, we are pushing, we are advocating, and we're trying to, again, say, let's use school district metrics. So that is where we are right now. The frustration level is there 100%. And we're going to continue to push for secondary. I will tell you, it doesn't make sense to me to use the county-wide transmission rate when we should be using our student and staff transmission rate. That makes more logical, rational sense to me. However, that's not the guidance that's there. And I encourage you to please go to the link, read the guidance, and reach out and let me know if you've see that a different way. But it has been reviewed by legal. It's been reviewed by our legal advisors as well as our BOCES advisors in that world that we live in. So I am frustrated. I can tell you the board is frustrated. They're in the same point. They have to look out for the entire district. They have to make sure that the district is protected in terms of legal lawsuits and such. And if we knowingly go against the Department of Health guidance, we put ourselves in a very difficult situation. And so that is part of it. We're not done yet. We are going to continue pushing. I was asked recently, when's our drop dead date? Like, am I going to come out and say we're not opening? No, we're going to continue pushing. My focus has been, if we can get kids back, if it's 6 weeks or 5 weeks, let's get kids back into school to return to some normal before summer starts. So we're going to continue pushing this. I will continue to do updates. There'll be another update coming this week on what we have learned and what we think we can do. And again, we're working with all schools across Monroe County. So that's where we are. I apologize, I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but it's frustrating, it really is. So we talk about what are we going to do after post-COVID, whenever that might be, but really next year. And so Dr. Driffill is going to talk through the budget, not mention it, and I just wanted to share a couple of things in here, is that we are adding 1.6 social workers to our current social worker setup. So one of the things in this budget, if approved, a social worker at Bay Trail will become full-time, as well as an additional 1.0 social worker to support the needs across the district, so, to really help support our TIG model, trauma, illness, and grief. We're looking at COVID return from school as trauma, as many people mentioned, and what our students are dealing with, and coming back into school. While that's a start, we also know and believe that we'll have to be working with students there. And then we're looking at district level support for whole student initiatives, an assistant superintendent role of equity and access. And so really what we're looking at is this board and this community has really been very supportive around the whole student initiative. We're the only district that uses that term, the support of the whole student, and really focusing on the uniqueness of every individual student. We've got, as Scott Dressler talked about today, some incredible areas of support for our students with disabilities and pushing them to really get to that highest level of diploma they can. We also have enrichment programs across the district that support students that need additional support when it comes to rigor and push. And so this position looking at is bringing sort of bringing an umbrella around a number of the initiatives we have, knowing that when we return back to full-time school, our students are going to be coming in and needing that support and access to the curriculum that we can provide and make sure that meaningful instruction is taking place. And so really the role of this position as we're building it is work collaboratively to support the needs of the whole student, social emotional learning, which we've really dug into over the last few years, equity and inclusion, and access to meaningful curriculum and text. And then also to lead and support restorative practices, to celebrate the uniqueness of each student and promote a safe and welcoming learning environment. Right now, restorative practices is often running, if you have a child in cobbles, they're using restorative practices. They do restorative circles every morning. They talk through, they have morning meeting, and then when there's a conflict of any sort, they bring kids together to talk through it and listen and learn, because it shouldn't be about punishment, it should be about learning from behaviors. And we do that as well in pockets at the high school and in pockets across the district. But what we need to do is make that a full district initiative. So a lot of this does deal around the equity and making sure that every student, regardless of race, religion, creed, background, is that they all feel truly unique in our classroom. They see themselves in our curriculum. And when we talk about being a safe and welcoming environment, which I believe we are, I've got 2 kids in the district who love it, that we really want to make sure that we're listening to our students and focusing on what we can do to support them, especially as we come out of what we've been dealing with this year and coming back full-time in school 5 days a week come September. Questions?
Board members, any questions for Dr. Putnam? Lisa.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
How are you?
Good.
Question on the orange zone thing.
Yep.
Assuming we're moving to orange zone, I'm going to be hopeful here.
Sure.
How quickly could we get students back? And do you see this like going back and forth? Like if we go to orange and then go back to red, like what does that mean for our students?
All right, so that's a question we still don't have an answer to.
Okay.
Knowing where we are right now with 10 weeks left in school, I feel pretty confident that if we are able to get to orange, if that works and our numbers allow us to reopen, that we wouldn't have to go, if we go up to red, we wouldn't have to shift and close again. It takes 7 days basically. You know, that number is rolling, but it would take a week to shift that back up to red. And so, in working with Monroe County Department of Health, our understanding is once we can open, then it would be around looking at each case. So the only thing that would throw that off, to be fair, is if there was a cluster of COVID cases at our high school. And it was a large number, and they couldn't determine if it was transmitting in school or outside of school. It's possible that we would have to close and go virtual 100%. Or if we have time, kick back into the hybrid model. So, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I did.
Catherine.
But I'm trying to formulate my question. Tom, you had mentioned about the, hold on, let me see if I can find it. Okay, the continued advocacy for secondary schools to return by using school-based metrics.
Yep.
And so I'm assuming that all of the schools in Monroe County, they're all banding together, you on the superintendent level with the other superintendents doing the same thing. You taking this to Dr. Mendoza?
Yes.
Or, okay,
Yeah.
and so he knows this push is already underway?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. And sorry, I laughed in my mask because we just met with him again today, shared this information, and continued to push. And so, he doesn't, if you look at the guidance, the local Department of Health doesn't have the power to approve our reopening plans, but they do have to enforce them. So if we open and we are against the New York State guidance that's there,
Right.
we run the risk of being then told we have to shut down because we're not meeting that guidance.
Yeah.
And that has happened across the state. I mean, it does take, there is a COVID hotline. If you think that a business or a school isn't following the COVID rules, then you can make that call, an investigation happens, and that could happen. All it takes is somebody to say, I don't like what's happening, and call. So he knows this. I would say, I don't want to speak for Dr. Mendoza because he's not here, obviously, but he's not against this. He understands the merit behind it.
Yeah.
There are school districts in Monroe County that have 0 COVID cases in their school. Like, they don't have any. Like, we know we have some, we deal with them on a daily basis, and we work through it. And because of the 6-foot distancing we currently have, we're not seeing large-scale quarantines because of school. Right? Because kids are sitting 6 feet apart and they have a mask. Therefore, they're not being found as contact tracing. If we're at 3 feet, we still think we're okay. But again, it goes back to that transmission rate. But so as frustrated as we are, there are districts in Monroe County who are just as frustrated because they don't have any positive cases of COVID at all of students or staff.
Yeah.
Right? But they're still under the county-wide transmission rate.
Right.
And I tell you, if we look at our transmission rate and just use staff and students, I can't give you the number, but it's low.
Right.
We're
But it's always been low.
It's always been low.
Yeah, we've always had that because of the protocols in place and
We've
whatnot.
had, I think it's fair to say we've had spikes, and we know that in our district, but we've never been anywhere near the county transmission rate.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I'm glad to know that that kind of advocacy is, that on the county level, that it is recognized that this is going on.
And we have been, put out emails to our community and pushed around giving emails to Dr. Zucker of New York State Department of Health. We know that I've spoken to people who've sent emails to him. I know the board has as well.
Yeah.
I did just get a response after a month from the New York State Department of Health that just said, here's the new guidance. So it is frustrating.
Yeah.
And we're at this point where I totally understand some community, including my children, that just said, throw caution to the wind and just go for it. But it opens up a whole lot of other issues that we've got to make sure, on the other hand, that we do have to protect the district as a whole. We can't do anything if we're completely going outside of the rules.
Well, I think that's a very good nuance to be pointing out because I don't think that's on anyone's conscious thought process because everybody's coming at this like,
we want to open.
We want to open, exactly.
Yeah, and I think, on one hand, it's K-5 is great, right? It is. I don't want to knock that. We celebrate that. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But we heard from, even Abby mentioned it, right? So you've got high school kids who've got younger siblings who are heading off to school. right? And maybe at high school it's different, but if you've got a 5th grader and a 6th grader, that doesn't seem fair. It's
No.
not. And that's
That's
where we're
correct.
going to continue pushing for this. We're not saying, we're not drawing a line in the sand saying that if we can't make it happen by next week, we're not going to do it. We're going to keep pushing. You know, we got here because of a lot of pushing and advocacy. I am not giving up hope that we're not bringing back our secondary students.
Yeah.
I know the board's there. I know, and I think it's fair to say not every parent is ready to come back. They want to make sure we're doing it safely. We do have a virtual option, and I'm also telling you we're going to do it safely.
Yeah.
We're not, you know, masks are mandatory, and the
Absolutely.
cleaning and everything else that takes place is there. But it is frustrating, and I really have to stop talking about frustrating because I can go on for a while.
Yeah, but it really is.
It is.
So I think we can all agree about that. Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Tom, you mentioned that it is frustrating for you and for the board. You know, it is very frustrating for the board. You put us here in a position of responsibility, and we take this seriously for every student. And I would tell you that if there was a way we could do this with all the things that Tom explained, we would be doing it. I don't think there's any one of us who's happy about this. But this is the job you gave us. We take it seriously, and we're not going to stop trying. We advocate, as Tom says, with any representatives we can talk to. We advocate through our individually. We do it through our Monroe County School Board Association, through New York State School Board Association. So, you know, we are not just sitting here stoically without compassion, because we all are parents and we all understand this.
So well, I was going to say that concludes my report, but it doesn't, because now I'm going to turn it over to Dan. So Dr. Driffill will run us through the budget and go from there.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Putnam. Good evening, board. Hope everybody is doing well this evening. So, discussion for tonight. First thing to do is debrief on the New York State legislative budget that passed about 2 weeks ago today. And then we'll bring forward to our final recommendation regarding our operating budget for the 2021-22 academic year, including the proposed expenditures and the supporting revenues to support that spending. Within that, for review and adoption tonight by state requirement is the property tax report card. The local levy is our largest funding source, so it's important to go through that document. And then, as a last thing, just some upcoming budget dates as we plan towards our community vote on Tuesday, May 18th. So, looking back at this budget development process, this trip down memory lane, it's just been a dizzying 7 months, 8 months. So, as the board knows, the budget development process is a long process. It starts in the fall. It goes all the way up until May. I was thinking yesterday about conversations I was having with our prior director of facilities in the fall, and we were talking about what do we do if we have to cut 20% of our operating budget, as the state was threatening to do back in the fall. $25 billion education budget, they were threatening to cut $5 billion of that money. What are going to be our contingency plans? What are things that we can't let go of? How do we plan for next year? What falls off in terms of preventative maintenance? What's a need and a want? So all of those conversations, they weren't that long ago. This spring has been a rapid acceleration of financial improvement in many ways that we're going to cover tonight. But it's a testament to the rigor of the budget development process that we plan through things, we have conversations, we scenario plan, we bring the board multiple updates throughout the spring so that when we get to this point, we're in a comfortable place and that we have a financial roadmap for the year ahead. So everything up until this point, we have a proposed budget for you this evening for consideration and adoption. Legal requirements are ongoing around the legal notices being filed. And then on May 4th, we have our hearing, and then on May 18th, we have our vote. So the last steps in the process. So first up for tonight is just a state budget analysis, and it's better late than never. This year, it was a little bit late. There were some complications around COVID and people working remotely, and there were some real challenging things that the legislature was working through with the governor in terms of compromise. As we'll discuss, there were some very large funding increases for education this year, about $3 billion of funding. The legislature wholly rejected the governor's proposed services aid consolidation and cuts. Those were those 10 aid categories that were going to be combined into one and then capped on a basis moving forward. Particularly problematic was BOCES and transportation within that. And we'll cover what that looks like for us. I do want to let the board know that there was a compromise regarding spring 2020 transportation aid. So with the closure in the spring of 2020, all the executive orders were to maintain payment of our staff. These ended up being called standby costs. The governor's proposal was that any expenses incurred for delivery of meals and delivery of instructional materials would be aided, but not the standby costs or districts that contract out transportation, any contractual costs. So the compromise was that standby costs will be aided, but only up until May 7th, which is when the state officially decreed that the school year was going to be closed. So the standby costs from May 7th till I think last year it was June 15th or thereabouts, will not be aided, which doesn't sound like a lot, but on a 10-month calendar, that's approaching 20% of our transportation costs that won't be aided. So I'll talk about that effect. So it was, it was a compromise. I don't think either side was happy with that. As I discussed at the last board meeting, there were some proposals on adjusting the unassigned fund balance. The Senate had proposed increasing that 4% threshold to 8% for 5 years, and the Assembly had proposed increasing it to 6% for 3 years. Neither one of those made it into the actual legislative budget. So unassigned fund balance remains at 4%, and that's reflected in the property tax report card for review this evening. And then there were new revenue initiatives for the state, new tax brackets for very, very high earners, I think above $5 million and above $25 million. Marijuana, recreation, and mobile gaming were the big revenue items in this year's budget. So what does that mean for Penfield Central School District? So there's a lot of information on this chart, so we'll take some time to dive through the table. The furthest left column indicates the different funding sources within state aid. The next column represents what we actually received in this current year legislative budget from the state. The next column represents what the governor had proposed providing for Penfield Central back at his executive address in January, and then what the New York State actual legislative budget is for next school year. And then the year-over-year difference between the two budgets in dollars and percentage. With foundation aid, the governor had proposed keeping it flat. It would have been the third straight year where it was flat, and you can see that we're seeing a very large influx in foundation aid. We're still underfunded relative to foundation aid, the formula, as I'll touch on in a minute, but we're seeing a 16% increase in foundation aid, over $2.2 million. So some of these are estimates. So for instance, BOCES, the year is not done. Transportation, the year is not done. We don't know exactly how much money we're going to spend and how much aid we'll get back. When this comes out on April 1st, there's still 3 months left of the school year, so it's always an estimate that needs to be calibrated accurately. But that foundation aid, that's pretty hardwired. That's usually to the dollar. So it's fantastic news that that funding source was so amply improved for next school year. You can see through BOCES, instructional materials. Instructional materials is a reminder of our textbook money, library money, software money, and some hardware money. And transportation costs, those were 3 of the items that were going to be consolidated into one aid block. Those were restored as their individual aid grants. And you can see big increases relative to transportation and BOCES. The BOCES increases due to the one-to-one program that we deployed overnight, and also due to debt service payments for the BOCES capital project that they have ongoing at Monroe 1. Instructional materials declines a little because of this year's pupil enrollment decline, so that reflects the current year into the next year. And then transportation, the concern with that is that they have not accurately reflected the legislation compromise that they wrote. So we'll see on our budget that I actually backed off a little bit of money relative to what this is going to come in at. There's no mechanism by which the state has determined how they're going to gauge what were the district's costs from May 7th to the end of the school year. Further guidance is supposed to come out on that. We were told by the end of April, so hopefully in the next week or so. Excess cost aid, as a reminder, relates to aid that we receive for special education services for our students here in Penfield. Building aid reflects aid payments for capital projects. That stayed pretty consistent. And then things get really interesting. So last year we had the funding adjustment. So that was the pandemic adjustment from the governor. He took our CARES Act, that federal stimulus, that $300,000 from the federal government, reduced the state aid by $300,000, and then just gave us the federal portion and called it whole. He had proposed to do the same thing back in January with the SURSA funds, the Coronavirus Relief and Response Supplemental Appropriation Act of $4 million. That was that supplant, not supplement issue. That was our rallying cry a couple months ago. But you can see in the New York State budget that was actually adopted, there is no federal cut, there is no federal stimulus. It's a general fund operating budget. So where it comes for our school year for next year, general fund operating budget, they're showing on the books as a $4.4 million increase, or over 15%. So I've talked to many business officials around the state. We've had webinars, conversations, and what we're hearing is that this is kind of like a once-in-a-career funding influx. So it's fantastic news, and I just applaud school boards associations around the state for their continued advocacy, speaking with legislatures, because it does make a difference, and this is where the rubber meets the road. So down below, underneath the bold line, are additional funding sources that are coming to Penfield Central. So the first is UPK. So in the state legislative budget this year, the state had universally committed to funding UPK, even for districts like Penfield that do not have a UPK program. So this is money that we need to determine how we will be eligible for, what we need to do. There is a Office of Early Education meeting next week, I think the 28th, from representatives of SED to determine, can districts turn around programs this quick? There are a lot of considerations. We have community organizations, very robust community organizations. Do you have space? Do you have transportation? There's different meal requirements. There's all sort of safety requirements around UPK. So as of now, this wouldn't come to us as a general fund revenue. All UPK monies are always as a grant. They flow through the special aid fund. So it gives us a little time to figure out what it means for Penfield, but that's something that we'll be coming back to the board with probably in the next month or so as we learn more information about what this means for us. The other two items are the federal grants. So we finally have clarity and distinct knowledge of discrete dollar amounts of how much money we are actually going to receive as a district for the last two stimuluses. So the coronavirus SURSA that passed in late December has for Penfield Central $4.3 million coming to Penfield Central. Again, that is not a general fund revenue. It'll be passed through as a grant, so we'll have to apply for it. We'll have to have certain parameters established in how we use it. It is one time, so it cannot be set up for new programs that require ongoing expenses. And the same thing with the American Rescue Plan ARPA funds. For that, we have $2.5 million coming to Penfield. And I'll discuss these federal dollars a little bit more in a second. But I want everyone to know that when they see these really large numbers, that it's not necessarily anything that's going to hit our operating fund budget this year. It's going to be extra, and it's going to take a little bit more information to thoughtfully plan out how we're going to utilize these resources. So any questions on this yet? I'm going to go unpack a little bit of this moving forward, but I know it's a lot of information.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Board members, any questions on what's been presented so far? Catherine?
Yeah, just that clarification, Dan, from what you just said about these grants.
Yep.
So grants have to be applied for, and they're one-time only. So what does that mean? Would you do like a specific project with grant money, or would you make up for lost funds, or like how would you?
I hesitate to speculate on how we're going to use it because it's so much money, and there are neighboring districts that are getting much more than this even.
Yeah.
So it's really going to take thoughtful conversations. There are some rules that I'll touch upon in a moment where we need to involve stakeholders. We have to put a plan to the community. But yeah, because they're such large dollar amounts, we're going to have to be very thoughtful about these funds.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Board member?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm saying, were you going to add more to that, or?
Nope, I'm good there.
Other board members?
No, I just had a similar question as Catherine, but I'll wait for the end.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I did have a couple here. When you're talking about the grants, we have, I'm not sure if it's the same for all of them or different, but we have a certain number of years to to use that money.
Yep.
It's one time, but we don't have to use it all this year.
That's correct. Yeah, I'll touch on the expiration date for all the funds in a moment.
Okay, and then the other thing was on transportation. That's a big increase. Is that big increase a result of that reimbursement that you were talking about earlier, from the spring?
So our understanding of this increase is that it's accounting for all 100% of operations, and it hasn't backed out that compromise. So we need to get very clear upon what our expenses were from May 7th to the close of the year so that we can back out that aid. The state said they'll have more information about that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
So relative to our budget, I'm not budgeting the full $4.2 million in transportation aid. We're backing off that a little bit.
All right, thank you. That was it.
So then I just wanted to speak to foundation aid a little bit further because it's the biggest component of our state aid package. And this is the history of foundation aid in the state. I know we've looked at this before. It shows relative to the foundation aid formula, how much we were due, how much we were paid, and how much we were shorted in that year. The thing I want the board to be aware of with this legislative package is that the budget commitment was a full phase-in of foundation aid over a 3-year period. So this year being the first year, and then next year making up half of the remaining amount, and then an additional year where it gets fully funded. So if you do the quick math on the very bottom line here, it's potentially that we could see another $3 million in foundation aid for next year, and then another $3 million in the year after that. I want to point out that that is not binding. The state has annual appropriations. Things change. There are budget machinations. There are concerns around the state around telework and what does that mean for New York City? What does that mean for Wall Street profits, income taxes, things like that. But the fact that they put that out and made that commitment is a major step, and I think it would be difficult to politically backtrack. So next year in the spring, that'll be something that we really watch, and I can imagine that'll be part of the advocacy efforts to ensure that that commitment, that promise is held up on behalf of the New York State Legislature. So let's talk a little bit further about those federal resources because we get a lot of questions about what are you doing with all the federal money. So I just wanted to quickly break it down in a way that I think was most simplest to see from a graphical viewpoint. So the CARES Act was the money, the federal stimulus that was approved immediately when COVID-19 hit last March 20th. It was a general fund revenue as a supplant to state aid. We received $343,000. There were sharing provisions. If you recall, we had to share with the non-public schools that our students attend. We're going through that process now, buying the items for them as the lead educational agency, arranging pickups. The use cases were mostly PPE, so a lot of PPE for those local school districts. And those funds do expire on September 30th of 2022. We should have our CARES Act money completely wrapped up by June 30th of this fiscal year. So in the next 2 months, we should be completely done with CARES Act and all of our obligations. The SURSA money was that stimulus that passed in December. As I mentioned before, it is not going to be a general fund revenue. It is a $4.3 million amount. There are no sharing provisions. The funds don't expire for another couple years, till September 30th, 2023, and it's supplemental to other state aid. So there are some rules around what it has to be used for, but it is generally very broad. So 20% needs to be determined to go to learning loss. That is not narrowly defined. So I think we have a broad scope of influence on what we can do with that. And then the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, was the most recent stimulus just passed a month ago, also not a general fund revenue, also runs through as a one-time grant. Our amount is going to be $2.5 million there. There are no sharing provisions, just like the SURSA money, and those funds don't expire until September 30th of 2024. Again, a supplemental grant. As Catherine started mentioning earlier, there are some rules around this one, whereas we are supposed to have a plan currently in place on the website by July 1st. There's some discussion around the state that is too quick of a turnaround for these kind of dollars to accurately get people involved. So there's some anticipation that that'll be delayed, but we'll see what happens with that. There are also some other additional funding requirements for the ARP money. 14% needs to be allocated towards summer programs. 14% needs to be allocated towards extended or after-school programs. But other than that, like Sir said, it's very broad in its flexibility. There are lots of language around continuity of operation and things like that. So relative to these federal resources, is there any questions as it pertains to our budget? You feel comfortable speaking to these if you get asked about the federal dollars?
Board members, any questions? Okay.
Good explanation.
Okay. Okay. So that actually takes us to our budget. So the actual spending budget hasn't changed that much. As Dr. Putnam mentioned, we did add in a couple FTE positions regarding the equity and access role and the additional social workers. So the overall budget for next year as proposed is $104,343,650. It represents a 1.68% year-over-year increase, or a little over $1.7 million. You can see the largest parts of the budget increase are in instruction at about 2.5%, slight decline in our general support budget, transportation basically flat year over year, and undistributed costs, which I'll unpack in a moment, are up 1.18%. On the bottom, you can see where we've been in terms of spending increases in our budget in the past decade. This will be the smallest budget increase that we've had in about 10 years at a 1.68% increase. Our average over this time period has been 2.36. So the last 2 years have been a little smaller than the norm. Another way of looking at the proposed budget is by object. So wages are scheduled to increase 1.3%. All of our contractual services, utilities, professional development, any outside services, basically flat year over year at a 0.75% increase. BOCES costs are scheduled to increase about 7.5%. Equipment and materials scheduled to decrease 7.6%. Debt service scheduled to go up a little under 4%. Employee benefits just a little over 3%. That includes everything from employee contribution to the ERS and TRS plan, health insurance, dental insurance, all those various fringe benefits. And then interfund transfers is a big decline at 80%, or about $700,000. Again, taking us to that $1.7 million increase, or 1.68% year over year as a percentage. A third way of looking at the proposed budget is the component budget review, the three-part budget. So this came about almost 30 years ago now, is another way of looking at school budgets. It's the way that it needs to be presented in the budget notice, which is contained in our budget newsletter. That'll go out to the community after our budget hearing. You can see the year-over-year differences are all within about 1%. The administration portion of the budget is scheduled to take up 10.15%. Program 75.84, and capital just a hundredth of a point over 14%. Very similar to last year. Typically these don't fluctuate too much unless you're taking on major new debt service or something like that year over year. So the projected revenues, I probably buried the lead when we were talking about state aid, but with that massive influx of foundation aid dollars, we have an opportunity to recommend to you, board, a flat year-over-year levy increase for next year. So a 0% increase in the school tax levy. As you can see in these budgeted dollar figures, the state aid increase that we're expecting is over $3 million. Our tax cap calculation allowed us to raise taxes by $1.3 million this year. So you can see that that $3 million is more than we were even expecting to receive as an increase, and more than makes up for the actual tax levy component as well. The only difference with that $15,000 in the levy line is just a scheduled change in pilot payments, or payments in lieu of taxes, which are kind of under that umbrella as well. So state aid projected to increase over almost 11%. County sales taxes we've talked about before. We anticipate getting back to normal levels. Those are dollars received from both Wayne County and Monroe County. Miscellaneous revenue is just scheduled to be down a little bit, primarily attributable to interest rates being really low, uncertainty around revenue, admissions with games, driver's ed, some of those kind of things, peripheral expenses. And then a big drop in assigned fund balance. So with that influx of state aid dollars, we didn't need to allocate the full assigned fund balance that we have traditionally done over the years, the $2 million amount, just coming in at a quarter of that, at $459,000, or almost a 77% increase. Decrease, thank you. And then reserve funds, once again, no planned utilization from reserve funds and no interfund transfers. We had talked throughout the spring of utilizing $390,000 as an interfund transfer from the debt service fund, but with these state dollars, it was no longer a necessary requirement. So you can see that that matches expenditures and revenues. This is our balanced budget for next year, the year-over-year differences. In one handy chart. So what does this actually mean for the community, a flat levy? Since the tax cap's inception, we have not had a flat levy. We've always been within the tax cap levy limit, but we've never actually gone out at a 0% increase. So here's what we know now based on tentative information from our town assessors. We can expect that the tax rate for Brighton will increase about 2%. The tax rate for Penfield will decrease about 0.8%. Tax rate for Perrington will decrease about 3%. Pittsford increase of a little over 1%. Macedon increase of over 7% based on a big equalization rate drop there. And then Walworth seeing a very large tax rate drop because of their reassessment and equalization rates coming all the way up to 100%. The indicator that I like to follow is the true value tax rate, because it's a full value blended rate of all of your 6 components over your 2 different counties, and that would be scheduled to decrease 3% or 72 cents on the dollar down to 23.03. So, property tax report card is an actual required document that needs to be approved by the board tonight. It is sent to New York State and local media within 24 hours of board adoption. As it's written by statute. It does indicate that flat levy increase for 21-22. That's something that we've heard a lot about, so we're really excited to be able to make that recommendation to you. And it also projects our fund balance levels at year end based on a set of assumptions. We assume we include the new capital reserve that we're putting out for authorization. We look at the capital reserve utilization for the bus purchases. We look at the capital reserve utilization for the land purchase. And so on. So all of that is included for 3 months out. That was a new requirement a couple of years ago that we have to fulfill. So some upcoming budget dates. So we have Meet the Candidates Night next week on April 27th. The budget statement will be available on the website in all of our school buildings and at district office on the same day. For those new to the board, the budget statement includes things like tax exemptions, salary disclosures, all of our schools' academic report cards, how they're doing. It includes the property tax report card. It's a large binder. The budget hearing is scheduled for May 4th. The budget newsletter is mailed shortly thereafter. And then the statewide vote and election is on May 18th. On May 18th, we have 5 ballot propositions for the community to review. So our school operating budget for 21-22. Again, it's at $143,650, an increase of $1.7 million or 1.68%, and there's no increase to the tax levy for next year. We have the land purchase proposition to put forward to the community at a parcel of 40.1 acres at $802,000 at the corner of Jackson and Plank. That is paid from existing capital reserves, the 2016 capital reserves, so it's money that's already been set aside. There's no additional tax impact associated with that proposition. We, in accordance with our bus replacement schedule, have a bus purchase from the capital reserves. We're buying 7 large buses this year, or we hope to, at an $870,000 total cost, with $390,000 coming from authorization from reserve. We're proposing a new 2021 capital reserve for buildings, as our 2 existing capital reserves, the 2014 and 2016 capital reserves, are fully funded relative to their approved authorizations. And the reserve authorization that we're seeking for this new reserve is 10 years or $25 million in funding. And then finally, we have our Board of Education election. I believe we have 9 trustees seeking 3 3-year terms. So just some quick budget takeaways, some narratives that Tom and I kind of were discussing. Back in the fall, we discussed our budget goals, our budget factors and assumptions, and we think we've done a lot of good with this budget that we can propose to you. So it preserves all programming and staffing, all of the excellent things that we do on a daily basis here at Penfield. We're able to bring to the community a $0 levy increase year over year due to the additional state aid. We've built in flexibility for uncertain future mandates. Dr. Putnam mentioned that we don't know what the fall is necessarily going to look like yet. We don't know if we're going to have a virtual program. Yeah. We know in this world that we need capacity to pivot and be flexible in our operations, so that is built into this budget. We have commitment to the whole learner with the additional social worker FTEs in building that scaffolding around our kids as they return to more of a sense of a world in which they would consider normal again. And then we also have our commitment to equity and access through a district-wide position that'll be pervasive in all things that we do here. So with that, any further questions or discussion or comments or clarification as you consider adopting next year's school budget?
Board members, any questions for Dan? Lisa?
Sorry, I don't really have a question. I think it's confusing sometimes what 0% levy means when we look at a 1.6% increase. Can you just explain that and more like, because I didn't really know what that meant until I was on the board.
Sure, absolutely. So 2 different things. So our school budget, money that we spend, money that goes out, we're increasing or proposing a spending increase of 1.68%. So our current year operating budget is $102 million. We're proposing that $104 million amount. How do we support that spending? Through revenues. Our biggest revenue driver is the local levy, the local tax levy, the property taxes that are levied upon homeowners in the community. So we, as the board, have the ability to dictate what that levy is within the confines of the property tax cap formula. So we were, by formula, allowed to raise taxes on a dollar amount by $1.3 million for next school year. Based on the additional state aid, which is our second largest revenue source, we don't have a need for that additional local funding. So we're able to tell the community that as a board, we're not raising taxes by a single dollar for next year. And then everything else, how that falls out with rates, is a little bit out of our control. That's up to the town assessors, that's up to the state with their determination of equalization rates. Need a water. So, does that answer your question?
It does, but I think sometimes the word levy is confusing. Just to say that we are not increasing taxes, like, that's exciting. I think.
We think so.
Any other
I'm
board
excited.
members? Any other questions?
You're talking.
No. And then when you were just talking about the equalization, and I think it was the last meeting you went into this in great detail. So if anyone was watching and wants to see that presentation, and again, with the budget part is people miss because it's not exciting, but he does go into great detail on why it is the way it is and what factors impact how a person in one locality will have a different tax change than another locality.
Yeah, and we'll review that again at the budget hearing.
Do you mind if I say something, Mark?
You still have the floor.
I don't have it's still superintendent reports. I wanted to say thank you to the board and, for the community. This work, and while Dr. Driffill presents to the board here, we had a workshop earlier this year where the board has a deep conversation about the budget. And, I think sometimes we get lost in it, but the reality is, and Dr. Driffill mentioned, during the entire tax cap time, we've always been under the cap. We've never broken the cap. We've stayed within our means. But this 0% levy, which means that, what we collected last year from local share is what we're collecting again this year. Is that fair?
Exactly.
Like we're not, so taxes, with the equalization rate, depends on where you live, those are impact. But but it's a significant piece. I don't know of another community within our area that is doing this. And I think it's kudos to the board and their leadership around the fact that we know that COVID has impacted our community in many, many ways. It's an increased daycare costs, it's job loss, it's all around, the simple fact of how much money I pay on reusable masks, right? So all of these pieces, and all kidding aside, in this board is being fluid in the sense of saying, what can we do to make sure? With the tax cap calculations, as Dr. Driffill has talked before, and the board is aware, there's lots of calculations that go there, and there is, that piece around the feeling that you've got to try to always get to the cap. And this is a very thoughtful budget. Obviously, Dr. Driffill's done the job presenting it. It's up to the board to adopt it and for the community then ultimately to approve it with a 0% levy. So just a thank you to Dr. Driffill and his work and thoughtful analysis of this, and kudos to the board for really being along and really digging in and looking at this. So that's my thank you.
And I would also like to thank Dr. Driffill, because this is your first year with us. You've come in and you've taken, and we've been set in our ways with Dr. Sansucci. He's had his method, and you've basically made it your own, but you've also brought us along to understand your approach. And in this year, when you also had to deal with all the fiscal impact of COVID, when you're the lead business official, you have to address all that. So, thank you very much for what you've done with this.
Oh, that concludes superintendent reports.
Thank you. Thank you for really. What does that bring us? That brings us to. We have no facility items, so we are at 6.6A, which is the approval and adoption of the budget. So it is recommended that the Board of Education approve and adopt the 2021-22 budget. So the Board of Education must adopt the budget for presentation to the voters on May 18th, 2021. May I have a motion and a second that the budget for the 2021-2022 school year be submitted to the voters for approval on May 18th, 2021 in the amount of $104,343,650.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Now we have the budget, the property tax report card. Each year prior to the school budget vote, all districts are required to submit a property tax report card to the New York State Education Department. The report includes information on proposed school budget and projected tax levy, as well as restricted, unrestricted, and appropriated fund balances. The required report card showing information for 2020, 2021, and 2020-22 is attached. The property tax report card is due by the next business day after board approval, but no later than April 23rd, 2021. Be it resolved that the Penfield Central School District Board of Education approve the 2021-22 property tax report card as presented, and be it further resolved that the Assistant Superintendent for Business and Finance is directed to submit the property tax report card to the State Education Department by the end of the next business day following this approval. So may I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. So we have policies for second reading and approval. So this is the second reading. We covered them at the last meeting. It's 7312, instructional materials, and 7320, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and other substances. So I guess first let me have a motion and a second that we approve these policies.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments about this?
There were no comments from the public as this has been up for review.
Thank you. So, okay.
We're voting.
We'll vote now. We have all those in favor?
I was jumping the gun.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank
You
you.
got me to go through the red light. I'm watching you and not the red.
BOCES board candidates. That the Board of Education cast one vote for the election of each candidate as a member of the Monroe 1 BOCES board. The following candidates have been nominated by the respective boards for the position as members of the BOCES board. It has been past practice for component Board of Educations to endorse the candidate nominations by the Board of Education whose seat is up for election. Seat 1, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Robert Dixon, resident of West Arundequoit Central School District, as a member of Monroe 1 BOCES board for a term of office that will begin July 1st, 2021 and end June 30th, 2024. So the rest of these are all the same, except I'll just emphasize the name and the district. Seat 2, resolved that one vote for election of Maureen Knupp, resident of the Fairport Central School District. Seat 3, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Thomas Nespeka, resident of the Webster Central School District. Seat 4, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Nancy Samal, resident of East Arundequoit Central School District. And Seat 5, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Mark Kukanovich, resident of the Brighton School District. So may I have a motion and a second to approve those recommendations?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Now, next up is the BOCES annual budget vote. It's recommended that the Board of Education approve the BOCES administrative budget in the amount of $5,622,883 for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. So may I have a motion that the Board of Education approves the proposed BOCES administrative budget in the amount of $5,662,083 for the 2021-22 fiscal year.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is votes related to the May 18th budget vote and election. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following chairperson of election. The board approval of the chairperson of election for May 18th, 2021 budget vote and election is required. The chairperson of election is an eligible voter of the Penfield Central School District. That the board approve Megan Dorite, Esquire, as chairman of election for the May 18th, 2021 budget vote and election. So we have a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Chief Election Inspector. And that the board approve the election inspectors and assistant clerks for the May 18th, 2021 vote and election is required. All inspectors and assistant clerks are eligible voters of the Penfield Central School District. And you have a list of names here. I guess I should read through them since this is for the vote. Ann Bauer, Mark Juba, Sharon Juba, Nadine Mooksey, David Pete, Steve Perry, James Ryan, Jill Ryan, John Schmelk, Pat Schmelk, Joanne Schmidt, Paul Schmidt, and Jay Thompson. That the board approve the individuals named above to serve as election inspectors and assistant clerks for the May 18th, 2021 budget vote and election.
Second.
Any questions or comments? I would just like to thank these individuals for volunteering. So all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Go back up one. We missed B.
I'm sorry?
We missed B.
I missed who?
B.
B.
Item B. Just go up one. Yeah, there you go.
I didn't, oh, I sure did. Okay, thank you. This is the election of the chief inspector. That the board approve a chief election inspector for the May 18th, 2021 budget vote and election. The chief election inspector is an eligible voter of the Penfield Central School District. That the board approve Sharon Erkfitz as the chief election inspector for May 18th, 2021 budget vote and election. So may I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? I guess the motion carries. And my apologies, how could I forget you?
I think she did it on purpose. She was trying to move us along.
Yeah.
Next, so the Monroe County School Board Association committee meetings, we've talked about this in the past. This is where we collaborate with all the other school districts, the Board of Education of the school districts in the county. First off is labor relations. Someone like to speak to that?
Well, I'm the only one who goes, so I'll speak to it. Actually, we were in person and at the DoubleTree, and we were 6 feet apart, but we each had our own table, and it was very nice. But what was great was it was the review of the RASH to update, our yearly update on the our medical program. Thank you. I just drew a blank there for a second. So it was Scott Koval, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Management at Monroe 1 BOCES, and Charles McLaughlin, who's the Area Vice President for Gallagher Benefits Services. They did go over the brief history of the RASH plan, and here are some of the recent trends that since 2012, there has been significant movement from select to the lower priced value plan, and they are beginning to see more migration to the high deductible plan. Savings versus the community premium contribution is over $200 million per year, and the loss ratio, which is the percentage of premiums used to pay claims, is at 93%, showing the plan is operating efficiently for a self-funded plan. They also discussed recent initiatives to lower the plan costs. The drug concierge program that targets higher cost drugs that now have lower costing clinically appropriate alternative saved $1 million this year and will do the same every year moving forward. The Gallagher Pharmacy Practice conducted an in-depth analysis of the proposed contract and pricing terms with Excelis, and they were able to garner a net savings of over $27 million with no benefit changes to plan members by renegotiating the contract. So in response to COVID-19, the plan made a number of benefits and coverage changes. Members incurred no costs for COVID-19 testing, medically necessary office, urgent care, or ER visits because of COVID, telehealth services regardless of their purpose, and diagnosis and treatment of COVID-19. So during the height of the pandemic, many elective services were delayed. The savings from the delayed services more than offset claims for COVID-19 related services, which tended to not be expensive except for all but the most severe cases. Some rebounding of claims will occur as members begin to access services at a higher level. How big the rebound will be is uncertain. The plan's managers utilize 2 actuarial pricing models to inform new rates, and savings from cost reductions described above were used to allow the plan's board of directors to agree to adopt a rate of 4% for next year. The presenters discussed a number of initiatives moving forward to lower costs, but noted the majority of items that will yield big reductions in costs to the plan are completed already. And that was the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Barb. Next up is Legislative Committee. That's Catherine and myself. I will say that meeting occurred, I can't remember the date the CDC came out.
Right before
that right after?
Right. It was before that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was after we didn't know what the CDC recommendation was, but New York State Department of Health hadn't come out yet. Catherine, you want me to cover that then?
No.
Or did you have, I'm sorry, I thought.
So what happened was, it was kind of a hybrid meeting, and I was home, and I couldn't hear half of what they said, so I really can't address. They did the best they could with it, but it certainly wasn't a setup like this, so I missed most of the meeting.
Well, and I fully understand because I was in the same situation.
Yes.
I was able to get a few notes. It was again, this goes back to hybrid setups where you have in room and Zoom meeting combined. There's a lot of technical limitations. This is a hotel conference room. It was a challenge. I know there was a talk. The thing that came up, of course, was a school bus driver shortage, which is a constant and a universal in our area.
Yeah.
They were at the time trying to get a response out of the Department of Health, especially in the areas of barriers. We talked about the barriers are not supported by science. Since the CDC had come out with that by the time of that meeting, we discussed that. We also discussed that some districts were running out of time and they didn't want to wait. So they were buying barriers, not because they were supported by science, because they're not, but because they just wanted to play along with the New York Department of Health. And so they're spending basically hundreds of thousands of dollars just to humor the,
Which they can't use now.
Which they can't use now. So, there's a lot of choices. Not all of them are good, and very few of them are good. You just have to, do what you think is best for your district.
Right.
And give me a moment here. That was one of the main topics. Oh, and we as we advocate in the Monroe County School Board Association, they help us arrange for meetings with our representatives, especially the federal legislators. They're coordinating a meeting which is coming up shortly with Joe Morelli, and where we talk about issues of the day, upcoming issues. One thing like school bus driving, because the school bus driver shortage is very much a part of the fact that it's CDL, it's federal CDL rules, and if we can get those changed to make special rules for bus drivers versus truck drivers, that could lighten the load for us somewhat. So that's where where our advocacy, that's one place where advocacy can come in. And we do advocate for other things, including reopening. This is just the one example from this meeting. Information exchange. Would someone like to speak to that?
I went to that information exchange.
Did you? Did you go to it?
I didn't.
I did. I was there in person.
Okay, I was on the phone, and so I was the same issue.
Yeah.
And I was teaching.
You can, if you want to talk a little bit about it, I can just follow up my thoughts on it if you want.
Okay, I will do that. I will.
Sure.
It was a great presentation because it was by superintendents. And they came to talk about the superintendent initiatives around equity work in our county.
Nice.
And so it was Kathy Grotman, who's the president of president of the Monroe County Council of School Superintendents this year, and Sean Nelms, superintendent of East High School, and really presented just a lot of the work we're doing around, there's a regional equity network, REN, that meets at least once a month. That's superintendents, as well as we'll many times bring a guest. Sheena Conway, our assistant director for professional learning, attends with me in those meetings. I believe Barb Gregory attended one too that was focused around HR. So really about, again, building on what we can do to support this work. One of the things when we talk about diversity and equity, and I think the superintendent did a nice job presenting, is all of it is grounded in the New York State standards for learning. So when we talk about looking at history and making sure that we're bringing that approach that really is beyond, really making sure that students in our classrooms see themselves in the curriculum and are connected to the curriculum. I think what we heard is that, in terms of all of our greater communities, is reminding that it all comes back to the New York State learning standards. So we're looking at 4th grade and 7th, 8th, and 11th grade, because those areas across the county are a social studies unit in a social studies lesson. So I think they did a nice job sort of talking through the initiatives that we've been working on and how to build upon those. Also, the New York State Cultural Responsive Education Framework. And again, all of this comes from New York State, and then how do we put those into our local school districts to make sure that we're supporting, I think, the narrative of the single story, the single voice, how do we bring more voices and more stories to our classroom and to our learners? Hopefully I did that justice, but I think that was the focus.
Yeah.
Did he do okay?
Yeah, it sounds good. I wasn't.
For Emily said she was teaching, so she wasn't there.
It sounds really good.
Yeah. But it was recorded, and it's on the, will be
we
on the
have the
Monroe
notes.
County School Board site, and the notes came out.
The next thing is the Meet the Candidates Night, which has already been mentioned, but it's just a reminder that this event will be held virtually on Tuesday, April 27th at 7 p.m. I'm sure information on how to get into that, to view that, will be forthcoming.
Yep. And then Mark, B.
Did I do that again?
It's okay.
Thank you.
It's always B, though, you know?
It is. Okay, the next up is the approval of the schedule for the Board of Education, and you have this in front of you. May I have a motion and a second that the schedule that you see for the Board of Education meetings be approved as listed?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. We have no unfinished business. Do we have any new business?
I'm assuming we don't want to exec, it's too late.
No, I
To,
don't.
to do what?
Exec, we talked about maybe doing exec if paper.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I just want to make sure, just because I go to bed early doesn't mean that everyone else.
No, it's,
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, cool.
because we have the.
So
no, it's fine.
with that, if I don't want to miss this one here, may I have a motion to adjourn at 9:10 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? All right, meeting adjourned.